What's up guys, welcome back. This is Anime Crossover. You'll be watching What If Naruto Was a Saiyan Who Crash Landed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Part 2. Now, let's begin. The green ghost of Roshinna Tony Stark was acutely aware that the Malibu home had become a golden cage. It was almost 3 months since their spectacular return from the Afghan desert. At the time, the world outside the Stark estate's tinted glass had fundamentally changed. Stark Industries' stock had fallen, recovered marginally, and then plateaued in an uneasy holding pattern as Obadiah Stane urgently attempted to persuade the board that Tony was suffering from post-traumatic stress. The basement workshop was filled with the smell of ozone and the constant hum of activity. The massive, unrefined iron of the Mark I was only a memory. The Mark II, a sleek, aerodynamic marvel of brushed steel and precisely tuned repulsor nodes, stood glistening in its hydraulic gantry. Naruto sat cross-legged on the lab's reinforced concrete floor, a safe distance from the rocket test zone. He was bare-chested, eyes closed, and doing terrible, silent job of biomagnetic compression. The California sun had completely recharged him, and his primal pulse was a raging ocean of golden energy that he was actively directing into a small, dense sphere within his center. "Jarvis, pause the flight telemetry," Tony said, breaking the silence of the room. Naruto opened his eyes. Tony stood at the main holographic console, wiping his hands on a grease-stained towel. He was not gazing at the armor. He was looking at a huge, bright blue projection of a topographical map. "Come here, kid," Tony ordered, dropping his customary sardonic tone for a sharp, focused determination. Naruto quietly approached the console after unfolding his legs. He looked at the map. It portrayed South America's dense, expansive topography, quickly zooming in on the seaside city of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. "Shield is getting noisy," Tony explained, bringing up a secondary screen displaying encrypted data streams. Tony pressed a key, causing a sharp red spike to appear on a graph. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "No," Tony shook his head. Tony turned to face the golden-haired youth. Naruto focused on the red spike on the monitor. He remembered his own power rapidly erupting once Tony had reactivated his system. "You think there is another," Naruto remarked quietly. "I don't know what I think," Tony said while leaning against the glass table. Tony stared into Naruto's unusually blue eyes. Despite maintaining a grim stance, Naruto's shinobi instincts burst to life. This was a reconnaissance mission. An infiltration. It was just what his restless, solar-saturated physique needed. He offered a single quick nod. The Roshinna favela in Rio de Janeiro was a sensory assault that made the Afghan desert seem serene in comparison. The vertical maze of concrete, corrugated tin, and shadowy passageways was built straight into the steep slope. The heat was unbearable, a thick, stifling layer of humidity that held the odors of overripe fruit, open sewage, and frying plantains. Millions of people lived stacked on top of one another, producing a chaotic, deafening symphony of human life. Naruto Uzumaki moved among the rooftops like a phantom. He wore a black hooded sweatshirt and loose cargo pants, concealing his golden hair and wrapping his prehensile tail firmly around his waist. He did not employ his Saiyan speed or strength here. He relied only on his shinobi training, sending a tiny amount of suppressed energy into the soles of his shoes to walk silently across the creaking, rusty tin roofs. He closed his eyes, crouching near a tangled web of stolen electrical lines, and expanded his sovereign senses. The city's background noise was excessive, including Bale funk music, stray dogs, and defective generators. But Naruto ignored everything. He cast a wider net, looking for the precise, ferocious resonance Tony had showed him on film. Gamma. Radiation was odorless and invisible to humans. It tasted different to a Saiyan with a highly evolved biological sensory network. He sensed it. This wasn't a surge like Tony's monitor. It was a low and hefty thrum. It felt nauseous, angry, and severely suppressed. It tasted of bitter copper and ozone. It was a sleeping beast that emitted a frightening, smothering heat from the core of the favela. Naruto opened his eyes and focused on the coordinates. He moved. He crept into the shadows, dropping through dense architecture until he reached the neighborhood's industrial edge. The Pingo Doce bottling factory stood out in the humid night air. The huge, utilitarian structure was alive with the sound of conveyor belts and hydraulic presses. Naruto did not use the doors. He He scaled the factory's steep brick wall with only his fingertips, revealing small faults in the mortar. He crept through an open ventilation grate near the high ceiling, perching silently on a steel crossbeam 50 feet above the manufacturing floor. The night shift was in full swing underneath him. Workers wearing hairnets and blue aprons moved pallets of brilliantly colored soda. Naruto scanned the biological signatures of the employees, dozens of regular, weary heartbeats. Then he found it. The source of the bitter radiation discovered near a broken bottling machine in the factory's back corner. It was a dude. He was Caucasian and slim, dressed in a faded green cap and loose, unremarkable attire. He was holding a wrench and attempting to unjam a large steel gear. Naruto focused on the man. What he witnessed was very horrifying. The man's physique was a delicate and shaking shell. A gigantic, hidden ocean of pure, cataclysmic wrath lay beneath his epidermis, wrapping around his neurological system and permeating every cell in his body. It was a force so dense, so aggressively unpredictable, that Naruto's golden primal pulse twitched in recognition of another apex predator in the room. The man halted and wiped sweat from his brow. Naruto focused in on the man's wrist. He was wearing a hefty digital heart rate monitor. The numbers shone a faint green in the low light. 78 BPM. The man took a slow, deep breath and intentionally relaxed his shoulders. The number fell to 74 BPM. Naruto felt a deep empathy for the person holding the cage shut. He's not a monster. He is the warden of one. Naruto waited till the shift bell rang. The employees began to trickle out into the warm Brazilian night. The man in the green cap lingered behind, gathering his equipment, his actions slow and deliberate. Naruto dropped from the steel beam. He did not use the biomagnetic anchors to cushion the fall. He wanted the man to know he was present. He hit the concrete floor 20 feet behind the man with a soft, unmistakable thump. The man froze immediately. He didn't turn around immediately. His shoulders became firmly tight. Naruto saw the numbers on his digital watch suddenly rise. 85. 92. 105 BPM. The factory is closed, Bruce Banner stated with perfect, unaccented Portuguese, his voice taut. Naruto replied in English, I am not here for the factory, with a calm tone and no hostility. Bruce carefully turned around, still holding the wrench tightly in his hand. His gaze flashed past Naruto, searching the darkness for the laser sights of military guns or the heavy boots of General Ross's strike force. He only noticed a teenager wearing a dark hoodie. Who are you? Bruce inquired, stepping backward and placing a hefty wooden pallet between them. His eyes were wide and wild. Naruto did not move forward. He maintained his distance, his hands visible but empty at his sides. I know exactly what I am dealing with, Naruto stated calmly. He closes his eyes. Naruto slowly and methodically engaged his chakra pathways. He did not release his power, but he did let some of his inhibition to slip. A soft golden glow filled the darkness beneath Naruto's hood. The ambient temperature in the immediate vicinity increased significantly. The air buzzed with a heavy, magnetic vibration, causing the factory floor's loose bolts to rattle. Bruce Banner gasped and dropped the wrench. The big iron tool clattered on the concrete. Bruce could feel it. The creature inside him, the enormous, green sea of wrath that normally raged at the slightest provocation, fell completely, terrifyingly silent. It did not feel intimidated, it felt recognized. Bruce took a timid step out from behind the pallet, his gaze fixed on the boy's golden aura. You. Naruto murmured, I understand the weight of the beast. He opened his eyes. The artificial blue iris gleamed vividly in the faint factory lighting. He gradually redirected the energy, the golden glow diminishing until he was merely a teenager in the darkness again. They call it a monster, Naruto said, his voice echoing quietly in the huge space. Bruce leaned heavily against the bottling machine, his legs quickly weakening. He looked down at his watch. 115 BPM. He was afraid, but for the first time in years, it wasn't because of what he may do to others. It was the shock of being noticed. Who sent you? Bruce inquired, his voice cracking. Ross. A man of iron, Naruto replied accurately. Bruce laughed bitterly and rubbed his hands over his face. Naruto noticed the weary and desperate scientist. He witnessed a man fighting a battle on the wrong front. You seek to kill it, Naruto noticed. It is an infection, Bruce said, his voice filled with rage. 125 BPM. Naruto shook his head slowly. He stepped forward, undeterred, and came to a stand just a few steps from Bruce. Power is not poison, Naruto remarked, adopting the authoritative tone of a shinobi instructor. Bruce was drawn to the boy's unshakable conviction. But a cage only builds pressure, Naruto explained. What other choice do I have? Bruce screamed, his voice thick with collected sorrow. You must become the eye of the storm, Naruto replied. Naruto reached out, his calloused hand hovering between them. May I? Despite Bruce's instinct to flee, the teenager's biomagnetic field kept him in place. Bruce offered a slow, jerky nod. Naruto delicately rested 2 fingers on Bruce's wrist, directly over his radial artery. Close your eyes, Naruto instructed quietly. Bruce agreed, his breathing ragged. You are focusing on the heartbeat, Naruto remarked. Naruto poured a small thread of his regulated chakra into Bruce's wrist. It was not an attack, but rather a guide. Naruto commanded, do not visualize a cage, in a hypnotic whisper. Bruce swallowed hard. He felt a peculiar, warm surge of Naruto's energy running up his arm. It did not resist the heavy, terrible green radiation in his blood. Rather, it flowed around it, indicating a path. Breathe in the storm, Naruto advised. For 5 minutes, they stood in complete stillness in the dark factory. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the 2 warriors' slow, rhythmic breaths. Bruce's shoulders gradually relaxed from their irregular, fearful strain. The hard lines of fatigue around his eyes had softened. He wasn't fighting the Hulk. For the first time in 5 years, he was simply being alongside him. Naruto lowered his hand, severing their physical connection. Bruce opened his eyes. He looked down at his wrist. The watch's digital numerals flashed a steady, unbelievable green. 65 BPM. Bruce focused on the figures, his breath stopping in his throat. It was lower than his normal heart rate while he was sleeping. He experienced a profound and tremendous lightness in his chest. The constant, crushing pressure of the other guy had not gone away, but it was quiet, it was resting. Bruce was overcome with emotion as he glanced up at the adolescent. He lacked the words to express the enormous weight that had just been removed from his soul, even if only temporarily. Who? What is your name? Bruce inquired, his voice filled with amazement. Uzumaki Naruto, he replied. Naruto turned and looked at the industrial windows. His sovereign senses, which were previously focused just on Bruce, spread into the favela. His eyes narrowed. The energy in the city was shifting. The villagers' chaotic, typical human heartbeats were mixed with tightly regulated biological rhythms. He heard the muffled, synchronized thump of heavy combat boots moving quickly across the corrugated tin roofs outside. The calm is over, Naruto remarked, his voice sharpening as he returned to Bruce. Bruce's eyes widened with panic. He immediately looked at his watch, expecting the numbers to explode, but the shinobi meditation held strong. He was afraid, but he had control. I have to run, Bruce replied, snatching his tattered bag from behind the machines. Running will only prolong the hunt, Naruto remarked, stepping past Bruce. His posture easily transitioned from meditative monk to dangerous shinobi operative. The golden fur on his tail uncurled slightly beneath his sweater. Naruto peered back over his shoulder, his blue eyes full of promise. Naruto commanded Bruce Banner to keep the ocean motionless. Do not let the beast out. I will clear the path. The Pingo Dose factory was a maze of steel vats, conveyor belts, and deep, mechanical shadows. To a typical military agent wearing night vision goggles, it was a tactical nightmare. Too many blind spots, too much ambient noise, and a layout that nearly begged for an ambush. The Black Ops strike team now cutting the outer fence saw it as simply another hunting ground. Naruto Uzumaki, perched in the high rafters, observed their movements. His sovereign senses circumvented the corporeal darkness completely. He didn't need light to see. He could feel the electrical impulses of their neural systems, the rhythmic thumping of their highly trained hearts, and the cold, metallic buzz of their suppressed weaponry. There were 12 males. They moved with the sharp, synchronized efficiency of top military predators. They were dressed in dark military gear, their faces masked by balaclavas and the heavy, multi-lens optics of their night vision equipment. They held powerful assault rifles, but Naruto's keen eyes caught sight of the secondary weapons attached to their thighs and backs. gigantic pneumatic dart guns filled with thick, green sedative fluids. Naruto's breathing became slow and unnoticeable as he evaluated the hunt for a beast. They anticipate a target bereft of reason, relying on physical force and blind wrath. They're unprepared for a shinobi. On the production floor, Bruce Banner was hidden behind a stack of empty crates. He was squeezing his bag straps so tightly that his knuckles became white. Naruto briefly concentrated on the scientist. 82 BPM. Bruce's heart rate was increased, which is a reasonable human response to impending, lethal danger, but it was not spiraling. The man's eyes were closed, and his lips moved in a wordless, frenetic repetition of the meditation method Naruto had recently taught him. I am the seafloor. Deep, dark, immovable. Stay exactly where you are, Naruto's voice projected straight into Bruce's ear, using a concentrated thread of chakra to circumvent the factory's ambient noise. Bruce flinched at the distant voice but offered a short, fearful nod, drawing his knees tightly to his chest. The loading dock doors at the back of the plant groaned with discontent. Click. Hiss. The first team of 4 operatives broke through. They threw 2 small cylindrical canisters on the concrete floor. Flashbangs. Naruto maintained a fixed gaze. As the canisters detonated with a blinding, magnesium-white brightness and an ear-splitting bang, his Saiyan biology instantly adjusted. His pupils contract to minuscule pinpricks, screening the light, and his massive eardrums absorbed the tsunami without tearing. The operatives entered the chamber with laser sights that sliced through the haze. They raised their rifles and tracked the apparatus. Sector 1 clear, a rough voice murmured into a communication unit. Naruto tumbled from the rafters. He plunged with the precision of a hawk, rather than falling. He directed a small portion of his primal pulse into his feet, using a shinobi technique to alter his gravitational pull. He landed just behind the rearguard operative, making no sound. Nor a scuff on a boot, nor a rustling of fabric. Absolute quiet. The operative barely noticed the air pressure change. Naruto's hand lunged out. He did not form a fist. A strike from his powerful musculature would have fractured the man's spine and ruptured his internal organs. Instead, Naruto extended his index and middle fingers, striking a specific nerve cluster near the base of the operative's neck. It was a traditional shinobi pressure point. The soldier's eyes rolled back in his head, and his brain's electrical signals immediately short-circuited. Naruto gently lowered the 200-pound soldier and his hefty rifle to the concrete floor as he collapsed. It was finished in less than 2 seconds. The squad pushed forward without realizing they were now a team of 3. Naruto slipped into the shadows, vanishing behind a towering stainless steel vat of soda syrup. He moved like a ghost. He engaged the second operative from above while hanging upside down from a steel pipe with his legs. He reached down and grabbed the barrel of the soldier's rifle, applying a sudden, forceful torque. The heavy steel barrel bent at a 90-degree angle with a terrible crunch. The operative gasped and looked at his destroyed weapon in bewilderment. Before he could reach for his sidearm, Naruto slid down and struck the man's chin with the heel of his palm. The kinetic shock rocked the soldier's brain against his skull, knocking him to the ground. Bravo 2, report, a sharp, heavily accented voice screamed over the radio communication. The squad's surviving operatives quickly recognized their sides were vacant. Panic, harsh and metallic, heightened their metabolic rhythms. They spun back to back, furiously sweeping the factory's dark nooks with their night vision goggles. Contact. One of them cried, his laser sight sweeping across the machines. Fire. The other cried. They squeezed the triggers. The suppressed assault weapons fire a constant barrage of armor-piercing shots into the darkness. The bullets bit into the concrete and flashed fiercely against the steel vats, filling the air with cordite fumes and deafening lead ricochets. Naruto was not present. Using the body flicker technique, he had already covered 30 feet of open space and slipped perfectly into the blind spot caused by their muzzle flash. He stepped directly between them. He seized both men's thick, reinforced Kevlar vests simultaneously. Using only a portion of his Saiyan strength, he pulled them off the ground and slammed them into each other. Their tactical helmets collided with a hollow crack, and both soldiers collapsed into a tangled mass of limbs and tactical gear. 4 down. There are 8 remaining. The factory's front doors burst open. The rest of the strike team rushed in. their flashlights and laser sights cutting through the darkness. A man with a unique movement style led the second wave. Naruto's sovereign senses quickly focused on him. He was older, possibly in his late 30s, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes visible beneath his combat helmet. He did not move with the stiff, by-the-book precision of a typical soldier. He moved like a wolf. His rifle was low and loose, tucked tightly against his shoulder and perfectly balanced. This was Emil Blonsky. Blonsky's closed fist instantly stopped the 8 men behind him. His gaze swept the factory floor. He noticed the 4 unconscious operatives scattered around the loading dock. He noticed the bent rifle barrel. Blonsky ordered, "Hold your fire," with a rough, gritty accent of a seasoned mercenary. He reached up and pushed his night vision goggles onto his forehead. Blonsky gently moved his weapon around the top catwalks. Naruto complimented his sharpness from atop a gigantic industrial cooling fan. A veteran of multiple conflicts. His heartbeat is sluggish. He adores the hunting. Blonsky directed to spread out interlocking fields of fire, stepping forward. Naruto calculated the room's geometry. The remaining 8 men spread out in a broad arc, forming a wall of lead that would gradually sweep the whole factory floor. They would eventually approach the pallets where Bruce was hiding. If they cornered the scientist, fear would overcome meditation, and the Hulk would erupt, tearing the favela, and these men, apart. Naruto needed to catch their attention. He needed to be louder. He stood up on the cooling fan housing and removed his dark hoodie. He stood bare-chested in the faint light, his golden hair contrasting sharply with the shadows. He let a controlled pulse of his primal aura radiate outward. A dazzling flash of golden light illuminated the factory's upper levels. Every operative aimed their rifles upward. "Contact high," one of the troops yelled. A hail of gunshots destroyed the industrial fan. Sparks rained down like rain. Naruto had already moved. As the bullets chewed into the area where he had been standing, he propelled himself directly into the middle of their formation. He landed with the force of a mortar round, cracking the concrete beneath his bare feet. The shockwave sent the 2 closest soldiers prostrate on their backs. Naruto was a mix of light and shade. He moved through the squad with the lethal grace of a deadly dance. He did not use ninjutsu. He did not employ energy blasts. He relied solely on sheer martial arts mastery, aided by extraterrestrial biology. He dodged beneath the sweep of a rifle butt and drove his elbow into a soldier's solar plexus, robbing his breath. He seized a thrusting battle knife between his palms, breaking the steel blade like glass and sweeping the operative's legs out from under him. For the soldiers, it was a nightmare. Their training was meaningless. They were facing an entity that defied physics, a youngster who moved faster than their synapses could register, hitting with the stopping power of a moving truck yet with exquisite, non-lethal accuracy. Within 5 seconds, 7 more men were rendered senseless, bereft of their guns and pride. In the midst of the chaos, Naruto maintained a calm demeanor. The golden radiance vanished into his skin. Clack. The sound of a hefty assault rifle bolt closing back resonated in the unexpected silence. Naruto turned his head slowly. Emil Blonsky, standing 30 feet away, raised his weapon and directed the laser sight at Naruto's chest. Blonsky's face was a mask of hard, focused rage, but underlying it, Naruto detected a profound, addictive delight. "I don't know what laboratory you crawled out of, kid," Blonsky hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Blonsky is fired. He didn't spray widely. Instead, he fired a tight, controlled 3-round burst aiming dead center mass, intended to swiftly drop a charging target. Naruto did not try to dodge. He merely grounded his ankles and crossed his forearms in front of his chest, contracting his Saiyan muscle fibers to their utmost density. Ping. 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 The 5.56 rounds penetrated his armor and impacted his bare forearms. They were not able to infiltrate. They sparked, flattened on his flesh, and landed harmlessly on the concrete floor, leaving only little, red welts that quickly healed. Blonsky's eyes expanded in utter disbelief. He lowered the gun slightly, staring at the flattened bullets on the floor, unable to grasp the inconceivable truth in front of him. Blonsky murmured, armor-piercing. As a horrible revelation hit him, he wasn't on top of the food chain anymore. He was interacting with the gods. Naruto remarked, "Your weapons are loud, but they lack weight," as his voice echoed around the room. He uncrossed his arms and took a low, aggressive shinobi stance, waving his prehensile tail. It was a silent challenge. Blonsky was a predator. Flight was not in his nature. He dropped the useless weapon and reached for his thigh, drawing a large, serrated battle knife. He assumed a well-trained close-quarters combat stance. Blonsky hissed, "Let's see what you bleed," and charged forward. Blonsky possessed impressive speed for a human. In his prime, fueled by adrenaline, his strikes were lethal, designed to discover cracks in armor, slice tendons, and severe arteries. He stabbed up, aiming for Naruto's throat. Naruto did not even blink. He leaned his head back a fraction of an inch, the steel blade whistling through the air exactly where his jugular had been milliseconds before. Blonsky overextended. It was the fatal misstep of a man accustomed to battling slower opponents. Naruto entered Blonsky's guard. He did not use his knuckles. He opened his hand and buried the heel of his palm in the center of Blonsky's tactical vest. He released a controlled burst of kinetic energy, approximately 5% of his primal pulse. The collision sounded like a cannon firing inside. The ceramic trauma plate in Blonsky's vest fractured instantly. The kinetic impact penetrated the armor, fracturing 3 of Blonsky's ribs and knocking the seasoned soldier off his feet. Blonsky crashed into a big wooden crate, splintering it into kindling, after flying backward for 20 feet. He collapsed, panting for air and bleeding from the corner of his mouth. He attempted to push himself up, but his body refused to follow. He was broken. Blonsky did not feel dread as he lay there, staring up at the golden-haired adolescent advancing slowly toward him. Naruto used his sovereign senses to map Blonsky's irregular heartbeat as he stared down on the broken man. Naruto didn't feel the fear of a soldier who had lost. It was an all-consuming, dark, and overwhelming fixation. Blonsky was looking at Naruto not as a monster, but as a work of art. He had just felt a level of strength that made years of military training seem like child's play, and a terrible, desperate desire had grown in his spirit. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he understood that he wouldn't stop. He is the kind of man who will look for the beast to become one. "Sleep," Naruto said in a low voice. He reached down and pressed 2 fingers against the side of Blonsky's neck. This stopped the blood flow to the brain for just long enough to make the veteran soldier completely unconscious. The plant was quiet as a mouse. There were 12 of the best soldiers in the US military on the floor, and they were all neutralized without a single drop of deadly force. Naruto turned his back on the bloodshed and proceeded to the pallets in the corner. He reached over and easily moved a large wooden pallet out of the way. Bruce Banner was hiding behind it, his eyes tightly shut and his palms over his ears to block out the sounds of gunfire and broken bones. 88 beats per minute. Bruce had kept the line. The bottom of the ocean had stayed still. Naruto reached out and put a strong, comforting hand on Bruce's shaking shoulder. Naruto replied softly, "Bruce, open your eyes. The storm has passed us by." Bruce opened his eyes slowly. He stared behind Naruto and saw the unconscious tactical squad, the bent guns, and the broken concrete. He stared at his own hands and thought they would be big, green, and covered with blood. They were only his hands, pale, shaking, but still a person. He let out a huge, trembling breath. He cried as he stared up at the adolescent who had just taken apart a Black Ops killing squad all by himself without losing a drop of blood. "You," Bruce said, his voice choked with emotion. "You stopped them, and you also stopped him." Naruto said firmly, "You stopped him. You kept your anchor. I just cleaned up the mess." Naruto bent down, picked up Bruce's rucksack, and gave it to the scientist. Then he reached out his hand and helped Bruce up. Naruto said, "The military will send more. They always send more." He looked up at the high ventilation grate he had used to get in. "We can't stay in this city. You're no longer alone." "Where do we go?" Bruce said, putting the backpack over his shoulder. A new sense of trust calmed his racing mind. "Ross has satellites. He'll find me." Naruto went to the north and thought of the glass fortress over the Pacific Ocean and the man inside it who was making an iron suit. "To a sanctuary," Naruto replied, his blue eyes shining in the little light. "To a man who builds metal shells to protect fragile hearts. Stay close to me, Bruce Banner. We are going to America." The evacuation from the Roshina favela was a masterclass in shinobi evasion. General Thaddeus Ross has the complete, terrible power of the US military at his command. He had satellites analyzing thermal blooms, localized radar scanning the airspace, and heavily armed guards closing down the streets around the Pingo Doce bottling factory. Ross was looking for a huge, unstoppable force of nature that broke through boundaries and roared at the sky. He had no idea what a breathing shadow was. Naruto Uzumaki led Bruce Banner through the cramped, packed slums in complete, scary stillness. He didn't carry the scientist because Bruce's nervous system was too delicate and his pulse rate was too unstable to handle the body flicker technique's jarring, high-speed motions for long periods of time. Naruto, on the other hand, was like a perfect, living radar system. "Stop," Naruto said softly, putting his hand on Bruce's shoulder. They were hunched on a rusty, corrugated tin roof, and the hot, humid Brazilian night felt like a wet towel on their skin. The sweep of high-powered tactical spotlights cut through the darkness in the tight corridor below. Two military police officers were carefully scrutinizing doorways with their guns raised. Bruce's breathing stopped for a moment. He automatically looked down at the faintly lighted digital watch on his wrist. 94 beats per minute. It was going up. The excitement of the industrial fight was fading, and now she was feeling the crushing, claustrophobic fear of being hunted. "The ocean floor, Bruce," Naruto said softly, his voice a solid, grounding sound. He didn't glance at the soldiers because his sovereign senses had already mapped out their patrol route, heartbeats, and blind spots. "Don't be afraid. It's just wind on the water." Bruce shut his eyes tightly and shook his hands as he held onto the straps of his old bag. He counted the seconds as he made his lungs expand slowly. Breathe in the storm. Breathe out the water. 89 beats per minute. Naruto stood up from his squat and spoke gently. "They are moving past." His tail's golden fur waved back and forth as it felt the change in the air. "We're going now." They slipped through the net for 2 hours of pain. Naruto knew when every patrol, helicopter sweep, and checkpoint would happen. He took Bruce to the outskirts of the city, where the thick, wild canopy of the Atlantic forest met the dense urban sprawl. Tony Stark's Reach showed up there, on a small, abandoned dirt airfield that was completely hidden from ordinary radar. It wasn't a normal plane. The jet was sleek and matte black, with sharp angles that made it look more like a bird of prey than a machine. It didn't have any tail numbers or other identifying marks, and its engines made a low hum that Naruto could feel in his teeth instead of hear with his ears. As they broke through the trees, the back loading ramp went down without a sound. "A Stark Industries stealth transport," Bruce said, and his scientific mind quickly realized that the engineering was impossible. The radar cross-section on that hull must be smaller than a pigeon. How did he get this past Brazil's airspace? Naruto just said, "The Man of Iron does not ask for permission to use the sky," as he walked up the ramp. The inside of the jet was a shocking contrast to the poor conditions of the favela. It was a place of extreme luxury and antiseptic efficiency. Soft leather chairs, brilliant holographic flight displays, and a galley that is always supplied and kept at the right temperature. There was no pilot. The cockpit was black, and the flying yoke moved on its own, under the full control of the ghost in the wires. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Naruto." Dr. Banner, Jarvis's clear, precisely modulated British voice came via the cabin speakers. "I have secured the perimeter. Sir apologizes for not being able to attend the extraction in person, but he is currently busy with a calibration issue. Please protect yourselves. Ascent will be quick." Bruce almost fell into one of the soft leather chairs. His whole body shook from the rapid drop in adrenaline. He put his backpack on the floor and put his hands over his face. The ramp closed, and the cabin was suddenly chilly and peaceful, with a lot of pressure. The jet blasted forward, taking off from the dirt runway with a terrifyingly fast vertical speed and huge G-forces as it punched through the clouds and into the stratosphere. Naruto didn't sit down right away. He went to the galley. His Saiyan nature, which had burned a tiny part of its primal pulse to break up the Black Ops squad and help Bruce find his way across the city, needed food right away. He opened the reinforced fridge. When Bruce finally looked up 10 minutes later, the digital watch on his wrist said he was at a steady 72 BPM. He saw the extraterrestrial adolescent sitting cross-legged in the seat across from him. Naruto was surrounded by the broken wrappers of 6 high-protein ration bars, a broken plate of cold cuts, and he was drinking a gallon of water that was very mineral-rich. It was interesting to watch how he ate the food with such disciplined, mechanical efficiency. Bruce looked, his scientific curiosity briefly taking over his trauma. Bruce leaned in and said, "Your metabolic rate. The amount of kinetic energy you put out in that factory. A normal person would need 10,000 calories to recover. You're processing it right away." Naruto said clearly, "I am not human." He crushed the empty plastic water jug in his hand with a sound like a gunshot. He threw it away in a neighboring trash can. "My cells get energy from sunlight. The food is just a way to rebuild muscle fibers, it's a supplement." Bruce shook his head slowly and let out a hollow, incredulous laugh. "Solar radiation. Alien biology. 3 months ago, I thought my condition was the most impossible thing that could happen to a living thing. Now, I'm in a self-flying stealth jet with an alien martial artist who eats like a black hole." Bruce gazed at his hands. The pale, trembling hands of a man who is being chased. "Why did you come for me?" Bruce inquired. The humor in his voice was gone, and in its stead was a deep, deep sense of vulnerability. "Ross wants me because he thinks I'm a weapon. A super soldier. What does Tony Stark want? Does he want to learn more about gamma radiation? Does he want to make a better bomb?" Naruto's blue eyes were fixed on Bruce. The boy's eyes were old and heavy, like those of a shinobi who had seen the worst of human ambition. Naruto murmured softly, "Tony Stark doesn't want to make bombs anymore. He builds armor and walls to keep himself safe from the things he makes. He saw your energy from the sky, but he didn't see a weapon, Bruce Banner. He saw a man who was drowning and sent me to pull you out of the water." Naruto crossed his arms across his chest and relaxed back in the leather seat. Naruto went on, his eyes flashing with memories of Konoha. "In my world, we lived in villages. A village is not just buildings. It is a pact. The strong protect the weak, and the wise guide the blind. I have lost my village. The dimensional tear took it away from me." Naruto gazed out the front of the cabin, where the invisible link to Malibu was. Naruto said, "Tony Stark is flawed, with terrible, honest honesty. He is full of himself. He hides his fear behind loud words and machines. But when I was starving in the dark, he gave me a place to stay. He is the start of my new village, and a village needs a healer." Bruce blinked in surprise. "Kid, I'm a nuclear physicist, not a healer. The other guy, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of a healer. He breaks everything he touches." "He breaks things because he's stuck in a cage of fear," Naruto said calmly. "The green beast is a sign of raw survival. It keeps you safe. When we get to the sanctuary, you won't have to survive anymore. You'll have time to learn how to live with him." Bruce stopped talking as the deep weight of Naruto's ideas sank him. He had seen the Hulk as an illness, a parasite that needed to be killed for 5 years. No one, not even Betty, had ever said that the beast could be comprehended or even used. The rest of the flight was spent in silent thought. Bruce finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep after being fully worn out. The steady 68 BPM of his heart rate monitor acted like a metronome in the quiet cabin. Naruto went back to meditating, focusing his golden energy and getting his thoughts ready for the fight of wits that was about to happen. The stealth jet started to fall quickly hours later. It didn't land at a regular airport. The airplane banked abruptly over the Pacific Ocean, losing speed as it got closer to Malibu's rugged cliffs. The huge, underground hangar doors that were built right into the rock face under the Stark home slid open. The jet flew inside, and the big steel doors sealed behind it, turning the hangar into a bright, man-made sanctuary of chrome and concrete. The ramp went down. Naruto went down first, and his senses quickly mapped out the area. The only sound in the mansion was the ocean smashing against the outside rock walls in a steady pattern. Bruce was right behind him, and his eyes were wild as he took in the facility's incredible wealth and technological edge. Along the walls were rows of beautiful, vintage luxury cars next to very advanced robotic assembly arms. "Follow the lights, gentlemen," Jarvis said. A path of soft blue LEDs led to a reinforced glass elevator. Sir is now in his main workshop. They went up one floor in the elevator. The glass doors opened with a faint chime. The underground workshop was a beautiful mess. Holographic blueprints floated in the air, gently whirling in luminous blue wire frames. There were sparks flying from a big welding station in the corner. There were hidden speakers that played heavy metal music at a low, thumping volume. Tony Stark was in the middle of the room, surrounded by broken bits of silver armor. His tank top was saturated with oil, and his hands were covered with black grease. The arc reactor's soft blue light shone steadily through the thin fabric of his shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His eyes were big and crazy, and he was entirely focused on the mechanical problem in front of him. "Jarvis, tell me the micro thrusters on the left boot are recalibrated," Tony said under his breath while he worked on a complicated circuit board. "I'm giving you to a community college if I get stuck to the ceiling again." "The thrusters are working within acceptable limits, sir," Jarvis said. "However, your guests have come." Tony stopped for a moment. He put the soldering iron down, and the smoke rose up toward the ventilation system. He gently turned around and grabbed a cloth to wipe the grease off his hands. His dark eyes quickly found Naruto. Tony gave a quick, approving nod, which was a silent way of saying that the mission had gone perfectly. Then he looked at the man who was uncomfortably standing behind the extraterrestrial adolescent. Bruce Banner looked like he didn't belong there at all. His clothing were torn, his shoulders were bent, and his eyes darted about the room as if he thought the holographic displays were going to attack him at any moment. He looked like a dog that had been beaten and unintentionally walked into a palace. Tony didn't smile as he walked forward. He didn't shake hands. He merely stared at Bruce, his smart brain taking in the man's posture, the digital watch on his wrist, and the deep, heavy feeling of fatigue that surrounded him. "Dr. Bruce Banner," Tony murmured, breaking the silence. He spoke in a casual way, without any fear or respect. "The military is looking for a gamma-ray radiologist. You're a tough guy to find." Bruce gulped hard and shifted his weight in a way that made him feel uncomfortable. "Mr. Stark, I didn't want to be found. But your friend here," Bruce weakly pointed to Naruto, "was very convincing." Tony grinned and threw the soiled rag onto a workbench. He usually is. He walked right up to Bruce, breaking the unspoken boundary of personal space, and stopped only a few inches away. Tony leaned down a little and squinted at the digital watch on Bruce's wrist. Tony inquired, "What is this?" as he tapped the glass of the watch with a finger that had grease on it. "A heart rate monitor? From a store that sells sports gear?" It's to keep track of my pulse," Bruce mumbled, feeling scared by how intensely Tony was looking at him, "to keep me from getting too excited." "It's a piece of junk," Tony said with no emotion. He turned around and walked back to his holograms. "It uses a basic optical sensor, which is very inaccurate. You can't use a Fitbit to keep an eye on a highly volatile, weaponized biological reaction. You need a subcutaneous biometric relay." Bruce gazed in shock at what had just happened. "Mr. Stark, I don't think you get it. I have a condition. If my heart rate goes over 200 beats per minute, then you become a huge, green rage monster," Tony said, waving his hand dismissively. "Yes, I read the SHIELD files. They hacked my servers, and I hacked theirs. General Ross thinks you're a failed super soldier, but I think he's an idiot with a lot of stars on his chest." Tony went back to Bruce, and his face immediately became quite serious. "You didn't fail, Doc," Tony remarked in a quiet, focused voice. "You survived a dose of gamma radiation that should have killed you right away. Your cells didn't die. They adapted. They evolved to handle the impossible amount of energy. You're not a mistake. You're a biological miracle." Bruce looked at Tony, and his breath caught in his throat. For 5 years, the smartest people in the military had looked at him with disgust, terror, or clinical detachment. Tony Stark was staring at him in astonishment that was deep and pure. "Ross wants to put you in a cage," Tony said, waving his arms around the huge, high-tech lab. "I don't make cages, I make answers." Tony gestured to the other side of the room. A part of the glass wall moved aside, showing a clean, unspoiled secondary lab. It had huge, stainless steel workstations, powerful microscopes, and a separate server rack just for it. Tony said, "That is the best biochemical research suite on the West Coast. It's off the grid. No SHIELD, no military, no General Ross. It's all yours." Bruce gazed to the lab and then back at Tony. For the second time that day, tears filled his eyes. The relief was so great that it made me feel paralyzed. "Why?" Bruce muttered, his voice breaking. "I could destroy all of this. If I lose control, I'll tear this house down to the cliffs." Tony stepped over to Naruto and slapped a big palm on the teenager's extraordinarily thick, unyielding shoulder. "If you lose control," Tony remarked with a wild, arrogant grin on his face, "the kid here will throw you into the Pacific Ocean. And if he's busy, I'm making a suit of armor that can punch a tank through a brick wall. We can handle a little green temper tantrum." Naruto stood perfectly motionless, his blue eyes locked on Bruce. He silently backed up Tony's arrogant promise with the full weight of shinobi discipline. Naruto's eyes told him to look at the water floor. Bruce Banner glanced at the man with the glowing heart and the alien youngster with the golden soul. He took a deep, quivering breath, took off the inexpensive digital watch from his wrist, and threw it in a garbage bin nearby. "Okay," Bruce muttered, and a small, fragile light of hope lit up in the gloom of his chest. "Okay. Let's get to work." For the first time in 1,826 days, Dr. Bruce Banner woke up without the metallic taste of adrenaline in his mouth. There was no dripping faucet, no police sirens in the distance, and no hot, humid heat pushing down on his chest. Instead, he heard the soft hum of centralized climate control and the rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean against the cliffs below. The mattress under him was so soft that it felt like cool water on his skin. It was made of Egyptian cotton with a high thread count. He lay completely still, looking up at the clean white ceiling of the guest room. He didn't grab his wrist right away. The cheap digital watch was gone, thrown away in Tony Stark's underground workshop. Instead, Bruce closed his eyes and directed his attention inward, looking for the huge, radioactive ocean that made up his life. It was there. The Hulk was constantly around, but it wasn't banging against the bars of his ribcage, begging to be let go. It was lying on the bottom of the ocean, calm from the effects of the golden-haired teen's shinobi meditation. "Good morning, Dr. Banner." Jarvis's voice came across the room quietly, just right so that it wouldn't startle him. "The time is now 8 a.m. Sir has asked me to let you know that the biochemical laboratory is fully operational and that the baseline blood synthesis equipment you asked for has been set up." Bruce sat up and ran a hand over his silver hair. He gazed at the bed's foot. On a sleek chair, there was a neatly folded set of new clothes. Soft, flexible linen pants and a loose, breathable Henley shirt in shades of gray and slate that didn't trigger any bad feelings. Bruce said, "Thank you, Jarvis," in a rough voice. "I've also made a pot of sencha green tea in the kitchen. Mr. Naruto says it's better than coffee for keeping your mind clear. But right now, Sir is drinking his 4th espresso of the morning." A faint, rusty smile spread across Bruce's face. He got dressed fast and walked through the mansion's glass passageways. The size of the buildings, which were drenched in the bright California sun, was mind-boggling. He entered the kitchen, drank steaming green tea, and proceeded to the glass elevator. As he descended deeper into the subterranean levels, the mood changed from peaceful luxury to a frenzied, hyper-focused industrial war room. The huge glass doors slid open. Tony Stark was right where Bruce had left him the night before. The millionaire stood at a large workbench with safety goggles pulled down over his eyes and a blowtorch in his right hand. He was methodically welding a series of minuscule silver articulation joints to a sleek, hefty metal gauntlet. Naruto Uzumaki stood in the center of the room, absolutely still on the concrete floor. Naruto wore no shirt, exposing his scarred muscles. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly and rhythmically. He was holding a large, solid steel barbell, approximately 400 pounds, straight out in front of him with one hand. His arm was absolutely parallel to the floor, neither wavering or dipping 1 millimeter. Bruce entered the room softly, sipping tea, fascinated by the teenager's scary biomechanics. "He's been holding that for 45 minutes, Tony stated without glancing up from the blowtorch. The blue flame hissed against the metal. Tony turned off the torch and flipped his goggles up. He turned to Bruce, grabbed a mug of cold espresso, and sipped. "I did," Bruce acknowledged, moving closer to the workbench. He examined the disassembled bits of brushed silver armor spread across the tables. "The Mark II," Tony corrected, tapping the silver gauntlet. Bruce noticed a shimmering blue circle beneath Tony's thin shirt. Years of anxiety had buried scientific curiosity, but it had now risen. "The power source," Bruce muttered, nodding to Tony's chest. "It was impossible," Tony agreed, leaning on the table. Bruce scowled and narrowed his eyes as he observed the faint, pale light. "Every second of every day," Tony said, his voice free of self-pity. Bruce looked from Tony to Naruto, who was still carrying the 400-pound barbell like a broomstick. He understood exactly what Tony meant on the stealth jet. I erect fences to protect myself from my own creations. Bruce softly commented, we are a house of broken toys, and felt a great feeling of kinship. The billionaire with a mechanical heart, the extraterrestrial boy with a raging golden beast within, and the pursued scientist cursed with an ocean of gamma anger. Tony smirked as he tightened the gauntlet's repulsor node with a specialized screwdriver. Naruto silently lowered the steel barbell to the floor. He opened his eyes and turned toward Bruce. The ocean floor held during the night, Naruto replied, confirming his sovereign senses. It did, Bruce agreed, staring at the adolescent with gratitude. You are relying entirely on mental suppression, Naruto replied, stepping over. Naruto pointed to Tony's workbench. Tony looked up, his eyes shining. Tony pulled the silver gauntlets off the table. Tony slipped his hands into the thick silver gauntlets. They clicked into place with a harsh mechanical click. Tony directed Jarvis to step away from the workbench and walk to the center of the reinforced concrete testing area. Sir, I must strongly advise against this, Jarvis said. It's fine, Jay, Tony responded. The robotic arm moved forward and enthusiastically raised the fire extinguisher. Bruce took a terrified step back and hid behind a hefty, blast-proof glass wall. Naruto simply stood his place, arms folded, and watched intently. Tony stood with his feet shoulder-width apart. He raised his hands, palms toward the floor, and held his arms tightly at his sides. He took a long breath, his face contracting from great concentration. Tony activated the repulsors. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched, ripping screech that vibrated directly in the core of the teeth. A dazzling flash of pure, white-hot plasma exploded from Tony's boot soles. Immediately, the huge thrust attempted to push him upward and flip him backward, just as yesterday. The physics of vector push demanded the path of least resistance. But this time, Tony was prepared. He activated the secondary repulsors in the gauntlets. Two smaller, extraordinarily bright plasma beams shot downward, impacting the concrete floor. The effect was immediate and astounding. The palm repulsors provided strong, uncompromising kinetic force. They counteracted the boot's erratic thrust, immediately stabilizing his center of gravity. Tony Stark sprang off the earth. He did not shoot into the ceiling. He hovered. He hung suspended in the air, exactly 2 feet above the concrete, entirely supported by pillars of light and sound. The repulsor-generated wind rushed throughout the laboratory, tossing loose schematics and instruments off the workbenches. Tony's face shifted from a fearful expression to a proud grin. He used his right hand to make a microscopic adjustment, slightly dipping the palm. He moved effortlessly to the right. He adjusted his left hand and moved back to the center. He was flying. Bruce looked through the glass wall, mouth slightly open. He was a man who understood the fundamental, unchanging rules of physics better than anybody else on the planet, yet he was watching a man in a tank top defy them via pure engineering. Naruto smiled proudly as he watched the hovering billionaire. He noticed the connection perfectly. Tony had transformed the ancient shinobi practice of chakra control, the precise balance required to walk on water, into iron and plasma. Tony deactivated the repulsors, lowering the remaining 6 inches to the floor with a hard thump. The lab was absolutely silent except for the buzz of cooling fans in the gauntlets. Yeah, Tony muttered, looking down at his flaming silver hands with a fierce fire in his eyes. Tony pointed a gauntlet at Naruto. Naruto bent his head slightly. Tony laughed and unlatched the gauntlets. He strolled over to the glass divider and looked at the astonished scientist on the other side. Do you see that, Doc? Tony inquired, throwing the gauntlets on the table. Bruce walked out from behind the glass and examined the severe scorch marks on the reinforced concrete. The hope that had been a small, fragile spark the night before was gradually growing into a steady flame. How? Bruce inquired, his scientific mind active. Then we don't use technology, Naruto interrupted, stepping forward. He gazed at Bruce, his blue eyes filled with assurance. Naruto reached out his hand. He did not call the vast and violent primal pulse. Instead, he conjured a tiny, perfectly compacted sphere of golden energy, scarcely bigger than a marble and hovering an inch above his palm. It was completely silent, but Bruce could feel the massive, crushing gravity emanating from the tiny sphere. Naruto pointed to the shimmering sphere and stated, "My Zenkai." Naruto closed his fist and extinguished the light. Naruto stated, "We are not going to suppress the Hulk anymore, Bruce," with authority like a combat commander. Bruce felt an icy spike of horror surge through his veins. Naruto said, "You are welcome to try," with a deadpan expression and a swishing tail. Tony slapped his hands together, creating a loud echo in the lab. Tony expressed enthusiasm for undertaking dangerous and unlawful biological experiments in his basement. Tony observed the two men standing in his laboratory. A scientist afflicted with unlimited wrath, and an extraterrestrial warrior endowed with infinite discipline. Tony returned his attention to the holographic schematics of the Mark II armor over his workstation. "The world thinks I'm locked in a basement losing my mind. Let's make sure that when we finally open the doors, we give them a show they'll never forget." Tony Stark did not sleep for the next 72 hours. The rich inventor approached problems with passion, bordering on crazy, rather than simply solving them. The ultimate engineering challenge was to create a confinement cell capable of withstanding a creature with endless, rising kinetic force. He repurposed a subterranean testing bunker that was supposed to securely launch prototype bunker-busting explosives. He stripped the room completely. He used a tiny army of automated robotic welders to cover the concrete walls, floor, and ceiling with interlocking plates of high-density tungsten carbide alloy, each 3 feet thick. He did not stop there. Anticipating the tremendous auditory and kinetic shockwaves that a changed Bruce Banner would generate, Tony sandwiched a unique acoustic dampening gel between the tungsten and a secondary layer of vibranium weave mesh salvaged from an earlier Howard Stark experiment. The green room was a sterile, featureless box measuring 50 feet across with harsh, recessed LED lights. It felt more like the inside of an apocalyptic bank vault than a room. The structural integrity is theoretically sound up to a localized impact of 50 megatons, Tony said through hidden speakers in the ceiling. He was standing safely behind a reinforced observation window 3 levels up, staring down into the chamber via 3 layers of translucent metal. Dr. Bruce Banner stood at the center of the tungsten vault. Tony's smart weave polymer pants were fitted and incredibly stretchy. His chest was bare, with dozens of little, flat biometric sensors plastered to his skin. Bruce was trembling. The air in the room was frigid and completely climate-controlled, but a cold perspiration streamed down his pale face. Naruto Uzumaki stood exactly 10 feet away from him. The boy was clothed in loose, dark athletic pants, with his scarred torso visible. He appeared fully at ease, standing with his feet firmly planted on the metal floor and his hands resting comfortably at his side. His golden hair remained calm, and his blue eyes were riveted on the scientist with steadfast concentration. Dr. Banner's heart rate is currently resting at 95 beats per minute and steadily rising, Jarvis stated through Tony's earpiece in the observation deck. "Bruce," Tony spoke into the microphone, projecting his voice into the green room. "I am breathing, Tony," Bruce said, his voice tight and panicked. He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "You cannot run from what is inside you," Naruto remarked calmly, piercing through the sterile echo of the chamber. Bruce gazed at the youngster. "If he hits me, I will endure it," Naruto plainly stated. Naruto took a cautious and deliberate inhale. He closed his eyes and groped for his core. He did not create the blazing golden aura. He didn't want to engage the Hulk with aggressive energy, as this would just fuel the creature's fury. Instead, Naruto used the biomagnetic anchor he'd perfected days before. The Earth's magnetic field reverberated beneath the Malibu cliffs, creating a deep hum. He set his cellular frequency to match it. A profound, dreadful calm descended upon him. The ambient static charge in the room increased, causing the hairs on Bruce's arms to stand straight up. Naruto opened his eyes. They were piercing and sparkling blue. He was no longer a youngster standing on a floor, but a living extension of the planet's foundations. Naruto said, "I am anchored," his voice vibrating with a peculiar, heavy resonance. Tony isolated the biometric streams in the booth by moving his hands across holographic keyboards. Bruce closes his eyes. He stopped saying the mantra Naruto taught him. He simply allowed the mental dam he had been desperately holding together to wash away. He allowed himself to experience the deep injustice of his existence, the end of his career, the loss of Betty, and the horror of being pursued like a rabid dog by the very country he had attempted to serve. The digital readout on Tony's screen increased dramatically. 120 BPM. 140 BPM. 160 BPM. Bruce let out a harsh and choked gasp. He collapsed on his knees, holding his chest. Gamma radiation levels are spiking exponentially, Jarvis said, maintaining a calm tone despite the devastating biological disaster below. 180 BPM. Bruce's eyes sprung open. The pupils had vanished, replaced with a solid, scary, bright green. The veins in his neck and arms bulged, growing black before shining with the same sickening emerald light. "It's happening," Tony said, leaning closer to the glass, fascinated by the unbelievable science unfolding in front of him. Bruce let out a harsh grunt that did not sound human. It was the sound of shifting tectonic plates. His biology underwent dramatic and aggressive mutations. The sheer amount of kinetic and thermal energy emitted from his body began to bend the air around him. The muscles on his back tore through his skin, quickly rebuilding into a dense, impenetrable green mass. His bones grew, cracking and shattering into new, monstrous shapes. He grew. 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet of pure, unadulterated, weaponized muscle. The transformation ended with a shockwave of displaced air that rattled the thick tungsten walls. The Incredible Hulk knelt in the middle of the room. He was a Goliath, the physical embodiment of raw, unrestrained rage. He punched his big green fists against the metal floor, creating large, permanent dents in the tungsten alloy. He let forth a deafening yell. The sound of an apex predator announcing its rule elicited the human brain's deepest, most basic terror responses. The observation booth's acoustic dampeners strained. Tony winced, clamping his palms over his ears as his heart pounded frantically against the arc reactor in his chest. Naruto Uzumaki maintained his composure in the room. The Hulk's brilliant green eyes focused on the only other living thing in the room. The beast was disoriented. The last thing the Hulk recalled was the dark, humid factory, the irritating sting of bullets, and the panic of the tiny human inside him. Now he was locked in a bright, frigid box, with a little, golden-haired creature standing far too near. The Hulk snorted, releasing a jet of scorching steam from his nostrils. He expected the small thing to flee. Everything ran. Or it fired at him. Naruto did neither. "I am here," Naruto stated quietly but plainly across the room. The Hulk comprehended the pose, but not the words. The golden boy wasn't afraid. The lack of fear perplexed the beast, and uncertainty quickly turned into wrath. The Hulk charged forward with incredible speed, despite his gigantic bulk. He didn't use a martial arts technique. Instead, he unleashed a reckless, powerful right hook. A sweeping punch intended to destroy a tank. "Kid, move!" Tony shouted into the microphone, his scientific detachment shattered as he witnessed a boulder-sized fist hurtle toward Naruto's head. Naruto did not move. He did not even move his weight. He just elevated his left forearm, pushing his Zenkai adapted muscular density to its ultimate limit and hardening his cells until they were as strong as vibranium. Naruto's forearm hit the Hulk's fist. The effect was like the end of the world. A huge, visible ring of concussive force shot out from the place of collision. The shockwave reached the tungsten walls like a hurricane, shaking the whole underground building fiercely. Tony was shoved back against his desk in the booth, and the consoles were shrieking alarms. The dust drifted down in the chamber. The Hulk made a low, bewildered groan. He had his fist against the arm of the teen. The floor under Naruto's bare feet had crumbled, and the metal was splitting and bending down like paper that had been crumpled. But Naruto hadn't shifted an inch back. His biomagnetic anchor had worked. The Hulk had put hundreds of tons of kinetic energy into the attack, and Naruto had expertly channeled that energy through his body and into the earth. The Hulk pulled his fist back and looked at his huge green knuckles, then at the youngster. That kind of strike had never been prevented before. Naruto carefully let his arm drop. The skin was damaged in a deep, furious purple, but the bones were fine. The Saiyan's healing factor was already kicking in, fixing the tiny cracks in just a few seconds. Naruto looked up at the huge green behemoth and said, "You have a lot of weight, but you hit like a falling tree. There's no focus, only chaos." The Hulk shouted again, angry that the youngster was so calm in the face of his threats. He lifted both fists over his head, locked his huge palms together, and brought them down in a powerful two-handed hammer blow that hit Naruto's head directly. Naruto did not stop it. Instead, he got within the Hulk's guard at the speed of a shinobi. Naruto put his open hand flat on the middle of the Hulk's huge chest before the huge fists could come down. He didn't let off a burst of golden energy. He didn't hit. He just pushed, using the flawless, mechanical leverage of Aikido and his terrifying Saiyan strength. He utilized the Hulk's own downward force against him. The Hulk's feet came off the ground. The giant was thrown back, and it was entirely in the air. He soared across the 50-foot chamber and hit the tungsten wall with a loud crash. The wall held, but the Hulk made a huge, flawless impression of his body in the 3-foot thick metal. The giant slipped down the wall and hit the floor with a loud bang. He shook his huge head in shock. He wasn't hurt. His skin was unbreakable. But the fact that he was overwhelmed utterly stopped his mental progress. Unbelievable, Tony mumbled as he ran back to the glass and peered at the data with wide eyes. The kinetic transfer. He judo flipped a tactical nuke. The Hulk got up on his hands and knees. He scowled at Naruto, showing his teeth, and the green radiation was almost smoking off his skin. He got ready to charge again. Naruto moved forward. He didn't get ready to battle. He let go of his biomagnetic anchor, which let his body relax. He walked slowly and on purpose right into the beast's personal space. Naruto softly told the giant, who was kneeling a few feet away, "Strike me again, and I will throw you again. I won't hurt you or shoot you, but I won't let you go." The Hulk exhaled heavily, and the heated air blew Naruto's golden hair back. The monster raised a huge hand and held it over the boy. He could feel the golden energy that was inside the team. It was a primal pulse, a huge wave of energy that was just as strong as his own. The Hulk knew that if this golden thing decided to fight, the room would not be able to handle it. But the golden thing wasn't fighting. It was just standing there. It was a line. The Hulk has never met a wall he couldn't break through. The two strange things stared at each other for a long, painful minute. The angry, mutated creature made by science and the disciplined, solar-powered warrior made by the stars. The huge, smothering rage in the room slowly started to go away. The Hulk wasn't being assaulted, and he couldn't attack without seeming bad. There was no cycle of violence that kept the anger going. The Hulk let out a loud, rumbling sigh that sounded a lot like a pout. He put his huge hand down and rested his knuckles on the metal floor. He sat back on his haunches, crossed his huge green arms over his chest, and stared at the floor. Jarvis spoke from the booth. "Sir, the heart rate is going down. The gamma radiation levels are also going down. The subject is going into a state of rapid biological de-escalation." Tony looked through the glass and let out a triumphant, unbelieving chuckle. He did it. The crazy kid did it. He taught the Hulk how to use the bathroom. The change started to go back in the room. It was hard to watch since it was so painful. The huge green muscles started to melt away, and the bones moved and snapped back into the right size for a person. The bright green light on the skin faded, leaving behind a sickly, tired look. Dr. Bruce Banner was lying on the dented metal floor, curled up on his side and gasping for air. His body was shaking violently. Naruto crouched down next to him and put a warm, rough hand on the scientist's shoulder. Bruce jumped and his eyes moved around a lot. He looked around the room and saw the huge dents in the tungsten and the floor that looked like it had been hit by a meteor. After that, he turned to Naruto. The boy was not hurt. The room was fine. I didn't break you," Bruce muttered, his voice rough, and tears filled his eyes right away. Naruto said, "You did not," in a soft but stern voice. The beast came to the shore, but the shore didn't break. Now he knows where the line is. Bruce let out a sob of sheer, unadulterated relief. He put his hands over his face and cried on the floor of the tungsten vault. He had changed for the first time since the accident at Culver University, and no one had perished. No one had been wounded. He was no longer a monster. He was a man whose condition changed a lot, and he had recently found the treatment. The huge doors of the vault creaked open. Tony Stark came into the room with a medical blanket and a bottle of water. He threw the blanket over Bruce's cold shoulders and looked at the tired scientist with a gaze of deep, real admiration. Tony gazed at the huge, Hulk-shaped dent in his impenetrable tungsten wall, then at the teen with the golden hair. Tony smirked and clapped his hands together. That was a good baseline test. "Doc, Let him rest for a few days. Next week, we'll see if we can get the big guy to do some heavy lifting around the lab. I need to move some engine blocks." Naruto got up and held out his hand to Bruce. "We've taken the first step," Naruto stated as he helped the scientist up. "The beast knows that the cage isn't made of iron, but of discipline. We will keep training." Bruce nodded and leaned heavily against the wall, holding the blanket around him. The nightmare wasn't ended yet, but the darkness was gradually starting to go away. Naruto gazed up at the ceiling as they left the green room, leaving behind the dented metal and broken concrete. He felt the tremendous amount of force he had just held back. The globe was big, and the fights that were coming up would be scary. Naruto Uzumaki knew one thing for sure as he went between the Man of Iron and the Man of Jade. He had discovered his new home, and he would do everything he could to protect it. The biochemical lab was a clean, hygienic, buzzing place that was very different from the messy, heavy metal-fueled mechanical workshop immediately outside its reinforced glass walls. Dr. Bruce Banner was crouched over a cutting-edge electron microscope. Next to his elbow was a steaming cup of sencha green tea that he hadn't touched. The look of fear and desperation that had been on his face for the past 5 years was completely gone. His body was relaxed, his breathing was steady, and the digital monitor that showed his heart rate was at a perfectly peaceful 68 BPM. Bruce wasn't looking at his own cursed, radioactive blood for the first time in years. He was seeing something very different. "Fascinating," Bruce muttered, his eyes close to the lenses. "It goes against all the rules of thermodynamic degradation." "Tell me you found a weak spot, Doc," Tony Stark's voice crackled across the speaker. Tony was in the main lab, standing inside a round, robotic gantry as mechanical arms carefully bolted the smooth, unpainted silver plates of the Mark II armor onto his undersuit. Naruto Uzumaki was sitting on a heavy workbench not far away, holding an apple. He had voluntarily given Bruce a drop of blood for his research because he wanted to know how the scientists of this world understood his Saiyan biology. Bruce pressed some buttons on his console, which sent the minuscule stream to a big, clear holographic screen that Tony and Naruto could see through the glass. The picture showed a group of cells, but they didn't look like cells from a regular human body. Even under the intense light of the microscope, they were quite dense, perfectly shaped, and gave off a subtle golden glow from within. Bruce said, "I can't find a weak spot, Tony, because there doesn't seem to be a state of entropy." He stepped out of the biolab and into the main workshop, where he wiped his glasses on his shirt. "Human cells break down over time. They use energy and make waste. Naruto's cells don't use energy, they compress it." Bruce moved over to the hologram and pointed to the blazing walls of cells. Bruce's scientific fire was fully awakened as he added, "The membrane of his cells acts like a microscopic photovoltaic array, but infinitely more efficient. When they are exposed to sunlight, they completely absorb the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums. But instead of just turning it into glucose or ATP, the cells make it into a plasma that is very volatile and can last on its own." Naruto said, "The primal pulse," and then he took a bite of his apple. "Exactly," Bruce said with a smile. "But here's the scary part. I found the biological trigger for the Zenkai adaptation you mentioned. When the cell membrane is hit hard or heated, like when the Hulk punches it, the cell doesn't just heal. The trauma makes the plasma core condense, which pulls the cellular wall tighter. The cell literally heals denser and more efficiently than it was before." Tony stopped for a while, and a robotic arm hovered near his silver breastplate. "So, anything that doesn't kill him makes him stronger, at the cellular level." Bruce said, "Exponentially stronger," with a deep sense of amazement in his voice. "He is a biological engine with infinite, adaptive potential. The only limit is how much solar radiation he can process and how well he can control the output." Tony whistled softly as he looked at the kid who was seated casually on his workbench. "Kid, don't ever let me challenge you to an arm wrestling match." "I would break the table," Naruto said with a straight face as he took another piece. He gazed at the armor that was progressively covering Tony's body. "Are the steering wheels ready, Stark?" "The flight stabilizers are fully calibrated," Tony stated, his voice falling an octave and full of serious, thumping excitement. He was given the last silver faceplate to hold. He looked at the cold metal eyes. "Jarvis, do one last check on the localized repulsor nodes." The AI said, "All systems are green, sir. I have to remind you, though, that this is a terrestrial prototype. We haven't simulated high-altitude atmospheric conditions yet. Tony grinned and put the faceplate on the helmet. We'll simulate it in real time. The suit sealed with a loud, mechanical clack. The Mark II's eyes lit up with a bright, ice blue color. The circular opening in the chest plate let a lot of light through from the arc reactor. The outfit was amazing. A perfect blend of man and machine that looked sleek and deadly. Okay. Tony's voice came from the suit's outside speakers, sounding artificial and authoritative. We do a hover test first, and then we take it outside. Tony got off the gantry. The heavy metal boots made a loud noise when they hit the concrete. Naruto jumped off the workbench and threw the apple core perfectly into a trash can across the room. He saw Tony take the stance, with his feet shoulder-width apart, arms lifted, and palms flat on the floor. Tony started with 3, 2, 1. The repulsors came to life with a shriek. A bright burst of plasma hit the floor, and the Mark II rose smoothly, perfectly suspended 3 feet in the air. The first test's wild, chaotic thrashing was completely gone. The suit floated in the air like a hummingbird, completely still, while the palm nodes made tiny, localized changes to keep it balanced. Telemetry looks great, sir, Jarvis said. It feels beautiful, Tony said, and the metal voice filter made it sound like he was happy. He carefully lowered his arms, letting the suit drift forward and float easily across the floor of the lab. He turned slowly in a circle to check the yaw and pitch. It was like an extra part of his nervous system. Open the blast doors, Jarvis, Tony said, pointing his gauntlets at the long, sloping tunnel that led to the driveway on the cliffside. Let's see what she can do outside. The huge doors below ground creaked open, letting in the bright, dazzling California afternoon light. Tony floated out into the light. Bruce and Naruto followed them up the hill to the edge of the circular driveway, where they could see the huge, crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. Tony was 10 feet in the air, and the polished silver armor shone in the sun. Kid, Tony yelled down. The sound of the machine carried over the wind. You said you could control your gravity. Hold on to the ground. Naruto put his arms across his chest. I have mastered the anchor. When I want to, I can't be moved. That's great for defense, Tony replied, pointing his hands down and the repulsors moaning louder. But a rock that doesn't move is just a target. You helped me learn how to fly. Now it's your turn. You have a lot of plasma in your cells. Stop holding it in. Push it out. Push the earth away. Naruto squinted his eyes. He always used his chakra to stick to things, dragging himself toward the earth or the trees to stay balanced. The idea of using pure, brute force kinetic emission to intentionally push away gravity was quite risky. It didn't have the quiet grace of shinobi arts. But he was no longer just a shinobi, he was a Saiyan. Naruto opened his arms. He took a deep breath and looked out at the ocean's infinite horizon. He shut his eyes and searched deep inside himself. Instead of bringing the golden primal pulse in to make himself denser, he opened his chakra pathways with power and sent the energy down through the soles of his bare feet. A quick, strong shockwave of golden light came from the concrete underneath him. The driveway broke right away. As a localized cyclone of displaced air swept across the cliffside, Bruce fell backward and covered his face with his arms. Naruto shot up. He didn't float smoothly like the Mark II. The horrifying amount of energy he sent out acted like a Saturn V rocket booster. He crossed the sound barrier in less than a second, and a loud sonic boom echoed off the cliffs of Malibu as he shot straight up into the sky. Whoa! Tony yelled as the Mark II's targeting computer tried to keep up with the golden blur that was flying by him. The first thrust stopped working at a height of 1,000 feet. Gravity, the law of the cosmos that never changes, stretched out to drag Naruto back down. He was free-falling for a scary second, with the wind howling in his ears. Tony's lecture resonated in his mind. The hands steer the energy. Distribution. Naruto turned in the air. He spread his hands out and pushed a steady, tightly controlled stream of golden primal energy out of his palms and the bottoms of his feet at the same time. The fall came to an abrupt stop. Naruto Uzumaki was hanging in the sky high above the clouds. He wasn't using repulsor technology or the way things move through the air. He was standing on a solid platform made of his own energy, which was pushing against the air. A bright, strong golden aura rose up around him, pushing back the chilly air of the upper altitude. Unbelievable. Naruto said quietly as he looked down at his hands and felt the freedom of flying without help. Not bad for a first jump, kid. Tony's voice crackled, but not from a comms unit. The Mark II's exterior speakers played the sound as the silver armor shot up through the clouds and hovered next to him. Tony glanced at the blazing youngster, and his HUD had a hard time keeping up with the huge amount of heat Naruto was giving off. "Race you to the pier?" Tony said, his competitive arrogance coming back in full force. Naruto smiled like a predator as he glanced at the silver gadget. "You depend on metal, Stark," Naruto said, leaning forward and letting his golden aura flare up angrily. "I need blood. You will lose." Tony laughed, and it sounded like pure adrenaline. "Hit it, Jarvis." Tony angled his boots and threw his arms back, pointing the palm repulsors straight behind him. The Mark II burst into a bolt of white-hot plasma that tore across the sky from side to side, leaving a huge trail of condensed vapor behind it. Naruto didn't take a stance, he just blew up the energy under his feet. He disappeared from where he was hovering and reappeared in a blaze of gold 100 yards ahead of Tony. Every time his speed started to drop, he made a small explosion of ki under his feet that bounced through the air like a stone that had been skipped at Mach 2. Bruce Banner stood on the cliffside and stared at the sky, speechless. Two streaks of light, one a clear, ice blue and the other loud, blinding gold, danced and flowed through the clouds, leaving behind vapor trails that decorated the California sky. Bruce said under his breath, "They're crazy," and a little smile crossed his lips. Tony pushed the Mark II to its structural limit high over the Pacific. The G-forces within the suit were so strong that only the powerful inertial dampeners made them bearable. He flew through the sky, doing barrel flips and abrupt turns that went against the laws of physics. Naruto was right next to him and didn't care about the drag or the lack of air. He was laughing, a loud, booming sound of genuine shinobi ecstasy that Tony could hear even above the noise of the rockets. "Jarvis," Tony yelled, his eyes fixed on the altimeter. "How high did the State Route 71 Blackbird fly?" Jarvis said, "The official record is 85,000 feet, sir." Tony said, "Records are meant to be broken. Redirect secondary power to the boot thrusters. We're going straight up." Tony turned the suit so that it was straight up. The repulsors roared, and the Mark II blasted up into the stratosphere like a silver bullet. Naruto observed what Tony was doing and did the same thing right away. He made a huge platform of golden energy and flew up, riding Tony's slipstream. The sky around them started to alter. The dazzling blue turned into a deep, bruised purple, and then into the hard, starry blackness of the high atmosphere. The air became very thin, and the temperature dropped to 60 degrees below zero. "Sir," Jarvis's voice said, with a hint of programmed haste piercing through the audio line. "The temperature outside is dropping a lot. We're going into a high-moisture thermal layer, and the outside plating is getting a lot of ice on it." "Keep going, Tony cried, his excitement at the climb making him lose his mind. "We're almost there." "Sir, the repulsor intake valves are freezing," Jarvis said again and over. The smooth, strong hum of the boots suddenly stopped working. Tony looked at his HUD. The digital screens flickered a lot and turned red. Outside the suit, a thick film of white ice was quickly forming over the brushed silver plating. It was creeping into the mechanical joints and locking the pneumatic seals. Clunk. The left boot thruster stopped working fully. The Mark II went into a rapid, uncontrollable spin when it lost its symmetrical thrust. Tony hit the inside of the suit hard, and the G-forces made his eyesight blurry. "Jarvis, deploy flaps," Tony yelled, his panic suddenly breaking through the adrenaline. "The flaps are frozen solid, sir," Jarvis said in a calm voice. "Failure of the system is coming." Clunk. The right thruster stopped working. The palm nodes blinked and then went dark when the frozen relays cut off the arc reactor's power. The outfit turned into a silver casket that weighed half a ton. Tony stopped going up. For a short, scary moment, he hung in the black sky, completely helpless. Then, gravity took him back. The Mark II fell quickly. It wasn't a controlled drop, it was a free fall at terminal velocity. Tony turned around and around, looking through the iced-over faceplate at the terrifyingly blue Pacific Ocean that was coming up fast. "Reboot," Tony yelled, slapping his frozen gauntlets together over and over again in a panic to break the ice. Manual override. Jarvis, give me power. Sir, the systems are locked. The impact will happen in 40 seconds. Naruto Uzumaki, who was above him, stopped climbing. He witnessed the silver streak fall to the ground, leaving behind a trail of broken ice. His sovereign senses quickly picked up on Tony's irregular, scared heartbeat. Naruto didn't think twice. He turned his body upside down, pointing his head toward the ocean, and grabbed all the primal energy he could safely get. He shot a huge, concussive jet of golden plasma from the bottoms of his feet. He didn't just breach the sound barrier, he broke it into pieces. As he dove, the air surrounding him changed into a cone of superheated plasma, turning him into a golden meteor that was headed straight for the falling Iron Man. 30 seconds until impact. Tony was breathing too fast, and the cold air from the upper atmosphere was getting through the frozen metal and making him very cold. He pulled the manual release lever for the faceplate, but the ice had frozen it shut. He was stuck. 20 seconds. The ocean was no longer a blue sheet far away, it was a hard surface that was becoming closer and closer. 10 seconds. A bright, loud flash of gold overwhelmed the falling suit. Naruto matched Tony's terminal velocity and fell neatly next to the spinning armor. Naruto's Saiyan aura was so hot that it acted like a small sun. Naruto stretched out and grabbed the Mark II's hefty, frozen shoulder armor. Naruto's voice shook the metal as his chakra sent it straight into the frozen suit. "I have you," he said. Naruto didn't try to lift Tony up. The sudden, forceful stop would break Tony's neck inside the suit. Instead, Naruto turned up the heat on his golden aura to its highest level. The heat came on quickly and was strong. The thick, white ice that covered the Mark II hissed loudly and quickly turned into steam. "Jarvis," Tony said in shock as the ice melted from the joints. "Systems are restarting, sir. The thrusters are working." "Hit it." The repulsors came back to life about 500 feet above the roaring seas. A huge burst of plasma hit the water, making a tidal wave of ocean that moved. Tony leveled out, and his feet skimmed the surface of the Pacific, making a huge wake behind him. He gulped for air, his heart pounding against his ribs, and his body shook uncontrollably from the cold and the fear of falling. Naruto pulled up next to him and hovered there with ease. His golden aura shone brightly against the setting sun. Tony turned his silver faceplate toward the kid. He couldn't say anything. The pompous billionaire had just looked death in the face for the second time, and this extraterrestrial youngster had saved him from the brink of death for the second time. Tony held up a shaking silver gauntlet and slowly gave a thumbs up. Naruto smiled back and tapped his chest just over his heart. "Stark, let's go home," Naruto said. "The metal needs to be painted. Silver gets too cold." The Afghan sun was setting over a scene of jagged rock and sand that seemed to go on forever. The Valley of the Ten Rings was a place where people died. Heavily armed guards were still keeping people away from the huge, smoking crater where the armaments cache had blown up months before. A sleek, unmarked black chopper landed just beyond the area of destruction, sending up a cloud of choking dust. The door on the side opened. Obadiah Stane went outside into the heat. He wore a finely fitted tan suit that was completely wrong for the desert, but he walked with the heavy, unbothered confidence of a king looking over his kingdom. Raza, the scarred leader of the Ten Rings faction, stood next to him. Raza's face was even more messed up now. The right side of his face had deep, puckered burn marks from the captive's explosive escape. "Stane, you promised me weapons," Raza growled, his voice a rough, broken growl. "You promised me an empire. Instead, the Man of Iron and his golden demon burned my camp to the ground and killed my best men." Obadiah didn't look at Raza. His steely eyes were locked on the huge crater, figuring out how much damage the explosion would do. "Tony Stark is a problem," Obadiah replied casually, fixing his costly tie. He had a brief lapse of conscience. "But his mind is still the most valuable thing on Earth. I just need to figure out what he made in that cave." Raza laughed at them. He lifted his hand to tell his guys what to do. A big, canvas-covered vehicle rolled forward and stopped a few feet from Obadiah. Two guards jumped into the back and grabbed the corners of the canvas covering. They took the tarp aside with a lot of effort. Obadiah Stane's breath got stuck in his throat. His eyes got bigger, and the cold, businesslike mask fell off, showing a dark, hungry greed. The original, Huge iron chassis of the Mark I armor sat in the back of the truck. It had been carefully dug out of the desert dunes and put back together piece by piece. It had dents, burns, and was missing its power supply, but there was no doubt about how vicious and scary the design was. "He made a weapon," Raza stated as he walked up next to Obadiah, but he left the plans in the sand. Obadiah reached out and ran his hefty fingers over the thick, rough iron plating of the chest piece. He didn't notice a suit for survival. He saw what battle might be like in the future. He had complete control over an army of iron soldiers. "Pack it up," Obadiah said in a dark, cruel whisper. "Put it on the transport. Get me my best engineers. If Tony won't make me weapons." Obadiah turned to gaze at the sun going down, and a vicious, happy smile spread across his face. "I'll just have to build a bigger one myself." After the frost at high altitude, the Malibu mansion felt different. The frenzied, crazy energy that had pushed Tony Stark for months had turned into a cold, terrifyingly clear focus. Robotic arms were carefully taking apart the shattered, iced-over plating of the Mark II in the underground workshop. Tony was at his main holographic interface, sipping a dark, thick green smoothie that Naruto had almost forced him to drink. He was looking at a computer model of the armor that was spinning. "The icing problem is a fatal flaw," Tony said, running his fingers across the hologram to show the atmospheric intake valves. "Jarvis, we need a new metallurgical composition. Something that keeps the structure strong but quickly gets rid of thermal extremes." "I have run the simulations, sir," Jarvis said. "In theory, a gold-titanium alloy from the Seraph Tactical Satellite Project would solve the icing problem while keeping the power-to-weight ratio." Tony snapped his fingers. "That's great. Use that. But the raw gold titanium finish is a bit too showy, don't you think?" Naruto Uzumaki opened one eye while sitting cross-legged on a workbench nearby. "You live in a glass fortress on a cliff and drive cars that cost more than small towns. You are showy, Stark." Tony jabbed a finger with grease on it at the teenager. "First of all, I'm a minimalist at heart. Second, I don't want to fly around looking like a giant hood ornament. Jarvis, add some hot rod red to the mix. Let's break up the gold." The digital hologram sparkled. The sleek silver armor disappeared, and in its stead was a stunning, aggressive color scheme. The main chassis and boots were painted a deep, metallic red, while the faceplate, biceps, and thighs were emphasized with a bright, polished gold. Naruto stared at the projection. The hues spoke to him on a deep level. Gold and red. The colors of fire and the primal force. The colors of a soldier. Naruto nodded in agreement, saying, "It is a good armor. It tells the enemy about the fire it carries." "Exactly," Tony said with a chuckle as he turned back to the console. "Start automated assembly, Jarvis. Also, do a deep dive diagnostic on the targeting HUD. I want to be able to hit a dime from 5 miles away." Naruto slipped off the workbench as the robotic arms came to life and started the long process of machining the new titanium gold plates. He was going to train himself. He proceeded through the glass dividers and along the reinforced corridor to the green room. Naruto entered the secured vault through thick tungsten doors that hissed open. Dr. Bruce Banner was already inside, sitting absolutely motionless in the center of the cratered floor left over from their previous session. Bruce was shirtless, with biometric sensors taped to his chest and wires leading to a monitor in the corner. His eyes were closed. His breathing was labored, but the air around him was dense with the latent, suffocating radiation of the beast sleeping beneath his skin. Naruto walked forward and sat in a lotus stance 5 feet away from the scientist, softly observing his heart rate of 72. "It's climbing," Bruce said quietly, squeezing his fists on his knees. "Let him pace," Naruto urged, his voice mesmerizing and resonant like a shinobi master. Naruto activated his biomagnetic anchor. The ambient static in the room spiked, forming a hefty, anchoring field of energy that instantly counteracted Bruce's wild, irradiated aura. "Increase the pressure," Naruto instructed. Bruce's jaw locked. He leaned toward the dark, horrific memories he typically avoided. The laboratories were frigid and antiseptic. The sound of General Ross's voice. Being regarded as a weapon creates an overpowering sense of helplessness. The monitor beeped rapidly. 90, 105, 120 BPM. Bruce gasped and straightened his spine. His neck veins began to protrude and turn a dark, putrid green. A faint, horrible green brightness began to seep into his pores, throwing a ghostly light on the dark tungsten walls. The room's temperature increased significantly. The beast was rising. "Hold the handle," Naruto's voice sliced through the growing storm, piercing and unyielding. Bruce groaned with a deep, unearthly bass. His muscles trembled, widening a fraction of an inch and pulling the skin taut. His eyes remained closed, but beneath them, a vivid green light pulsed. 135 BPM. The danger zone. "Pull it back," Naruto instructed. I can't," Bruce said, his voice distorted into a guttural snarl. Naruto maintained his composure. He did not express sympathy. Sympathy would just exacerbate the terror. "You are Dr. Bruce Banner," Naruto said, his tone authoritative. Bruce let out a raspy, anguished scream, echoing off the metal walls. He forced his lungs to expand against the Hulk's crushing internal gravity. He visualized the deep, dark ocean floor that Naruto had taught him. He visualized the anchor. The green light gradually and painfully faded from his veins. The increased muscular mass relaxed, reducing down to human proportions. The heavy, irradiated heat in the room evaporated, leaving behind the cold hum of the temperature control. The monitor beeped steadily. 95, 80, 70 BPM. Bruce collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for oxygen and sweating profusely on the metal floor. He was trembling uncontrollably, very exhausted. Naruto walked over to Bruce and placed a warm hand on his back. He fed a microscopic thread of disciplined chakra into his neurological system to help settle the shock. "You held the door," Naruto murmured gently. Bruce let out a wet, weary laugh and buried his face in his arms. "You did," Naruto confirmed. The massive tungsten doors hissed as they opened. Tony Stark entered the room, leaning comfortably against the doorframe, wearing a perfectly cut, obscenely costly black tuxedo rather than his workshop clothes. "Great job, Doc," Tony replied, putting a towel next to Bruce. Naruto turned to gaze at Tony's fancy outfit. Tony groaned and adjusted his bow tie, something like that. Bruce sat up and wiped his face with a towel. "Let them swarm," Tony grinned, slipping the armor back into place. Naruto frowned. "You do if you want to eat my cheeseburgers," Tony answered easily. The Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown Los Angeles was a dazzling display of luxury. Massive floodlights flashed across the sky, and a true red carpet stretched down the block, flanked by hundreds of screaming photographers, reporters, and wealthy socialites. The audience roared as Tony Stark's sleek Audi R8 approached the curb. Happy Hogan opened the door. Tony stepped out, beaming a $1 million smile and waving to the cameras as the flashbulbs exploded in a stunning strobe effect. Naruto Uzumaki approached the light from the passenger side. He wore a handmade midnight blue suit that matched his dense, strong build well. His wild, golden hair had been tamed little, yet it still burst with unrestrained vitality. The suit jacket was tailored to fit his golden brown tail snugly and invisibly around his waist beneath the fabric. He didn't smile. He did not wave. His blue eyes were frigid, searching the crowd with unnerving, lightning-fast accuracy. His sovereign senses blocked out all noise and light, focusing solely on the heartbeats and electrical impulses of the hundreds of people around them. "Stay close, kid," Tony said, his smile unwavering as they strolled along the carpet. Naruto didn't respond. He flanked Tony's right side, casting a huge, impenetrable shadow. The paparazzi, who were taught to recognize bodyguards, automatically parted ways with the teenager. Naruto's posture, a coiled, dangerous stillness, made every civilian's natural hindbrain scream at them to back off. They entered the vast hall. It was a sea of costly clothes, clinking champagne glasses, and shallow conversation. Naruto disliked it immediately. It smelled like cheap perfume, costly alcohol, and lies. A formal gala felt like a battlefield of deception to him as a shinobi. He could hear the quick, panicked heartbeats of social climbers, the steady, icy pulses of manipulative CEOs, and the physiological spikes of envy and avarice emanating from every corner of the room. It was exhausting. Tony quickly went to the bar and ordered a scotch. He was stopped by a dozen board members, who all offered phony grins and hollow words of concern for his health. Tony dismissed them with smooth, sharp humor. Naruto stood behind Tony, arms crossed, and analyzed the room. Then, the air tension altered. Tony, Obadiah Stane pushed through the mob, carrying a cigar and a glass of whiskey. He was nicely dressed, with a large, paternal smile on his face. Obadiah grabbed Tony's arm and exclaimed, "My boy." Tony's smile tightened just slightly. "Yeah, well, resting gets boring, Obi. Thought I'd come see the people. Show them the ticker is still ticking." Tony poked the center of his chest. Naruto's gaze fixed on Obadiah. Naruto had last seen the enormous man at the airstrip, when he detected treasonous activity. Naruto, now only a few feet away, plunged his sovereign senses deep into Obadiah's biological rhythms. The man's heart rate was stable. Too steady. He was beaming warmly at Tony, playing the role of the relieved mentor, but his underlying physiological condition was devoid of warmth. It was a frigid, calculative emptiness. He viewed Tony as an adversary rather than a buddy. "Listen, Tony," Obadiah whispered, getting in close and whispering. Tony looked at his mentor with true betrayal in his dark eyes. Obadiah screamed, "The arc reactor is a science project." His mask slipped for a fraction of a second, showing the angry corporate shark beneath. "It was our legacy," Tony replied coldly. A young woman with a press badge pushed her way past the inner circle, interrupting Obadiah's argument. Naruto recognized her heartbeat, which was racing with a frightening combination of dread and righteous rage. "Mr. Stark." The woman shouted out. It was Christine Everhart, a Vanity Fair reporter. Tony recognized her from an interview months previously. Christine pulled up a heavy manila folder and whispered. No, her voice shook slightly. She didn't look at Obadiah. Her gaze was fixated on Tony. Tony frowned. Christine pushed a stack of high-resolution satellite images into Tony's chest. "You said Stark Industries was out of the weapons business, Mr. Stark," Christine replied, her voice venomous. Tony's lungs emptied. He stared at the photos. They were clear, indisputable evidence. Massive containers with the Stark Industries emblem were unloaded by the same militants who had taken him captive. Buildings are in ruins. Men armed with Stark assault rifles herd civilians into the streets at gunpoint. Tony's head spun, recalling the dark and claustrophobic tunnel. The sound of gunfire. Yinsen's bleeding body is on the dirt floor. This is impossible," Tony muttered, his hands quivering as he gripped the images. Christine responded, "Someone is shipping them," and quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving the bombshell news hanging in the air. Tony stood frozen, staring at the visions of death bearing his name. Obadiah approached Tony and gently took the images from his quivering hands. Tony looked up from his empty hands and focused on Obadiah. The brilliant mind that enabled him to construct a flying suit of armor in his basement suddenly linked the final, terrifying dots. "Obi, old shipments do not include the Jericho missile," Tony added, his voice lowering to a scary whisper. Tony approached the large man and asked, "Who signed off on the shipment, Obadiah?" Obadiah's paternal smile faded. The mask peeled off completely, revealing a cold, cruel businessman who had spent decades in the shadow of Howard and Tony Stark. "You did, Tony," Obadiah remarked effortlessly, edging closer, his voice emotionless. Tony staggered back a half step, feeling the weight of treachery as a physical blow. "You." "I'm protecting your legacy, Tony," Obadiah snarled gently. Obadiah turned and walked away. He didn't take a single step. Naruto Uzumaki moved. He did not use his body flicker technique, yet his speed was still alarming to the naked eye. He moved straight in Obadiah's path, his big shoulders impeding the executive's exit. Obadiah looked down at the adolescent in the blue suit, an arrogant sneer on his lips. Naruto didn't move. He tilted his head slightly, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Obadiah's face. "You smell of blood," Naruto said. His voice was not loud, but it had a deep, weighty resonance that cut through the ambient noise of the gala, silencing the surrounding area. Obadiah grimaced, revealing true uneasiness beneath his arrogant mask. Naruto remarked, "You speak of legacy, but your heart beats to the rhythm of a thief, engaging a fraction of his primal pulse." The air pressure between them suddenly increased. Obadiah felt a horrible, physical weight pressing down on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. The golden-haired lad was not simply looking at him, he was seeing through him, demolishing his lies with surgical precision. "You did not just sell the weapons," Naruto said, delivering a harsh shinobi judgment in the heart of Los Angeles. Tony gasped as the final piece of the puzzle fit into place with deadly clarity. The ambush. His convoy path is precisely known. The 10 rings. It had not been a random act of terror. The killing had been ordered from his own boardroom. Obadiah's face became pallid. For a split second, the executive's heart rate surged. A spike of pure, unadulterated horror as his deepest, darkest secret was exposed by a teenager he had no idea about. But Obadiah was a survivor. He recovered immediately and glared at Naruto. Obadiah slammed his shoulder against Naruto, expecting him to surrender. Naruto was moored. It felt like shoving a solid wall of granite. Obadiah stumbled back, holding his damaged shoulder and looking at the boy in disbelief. Naruto raised his hand, folding his fingers into a loose fist. He was just a fraction of a second away from pushing his knuckles into Obadiah's chest cavity, thereby terminating the threat. Tony's voice sounded empty but forceful. Naruto halted. He looked back at Tony. The billionaire stared at the floor, his hands clenched so firmly that his knuckles became white. The betrayal had destroyed him, but the fire in his eyes was quickly reignited. "Let him go," Tony said calmly. Despite studying the tactical flaw of allowing an enemy to walk away, Naruto obeyed. He moved back, his aura retreating swiftly. Obadiah fixed his jacket and gave them a final angry look before retreating into the swarm of socialites. Tony stood in the center of the event, the noise and music overwhelming him like a tide. He gazed at the images of Gulmira that he still held in his palm. The burning buildings. The worried citizens. The stark weapons. Tony murmured, "You were right, kid," without looking up. Tony's eyes were icy and determined, as if he was about to go to battle. "We're leaving," Tony replied, turning toward the exit. "I need to get to the lab. The Mark III is ready. And I have an appointment in Afghanistan." The ride back to Malibu was completely silent. Happy Hogan drove the Audi R8 at high speeds down the Pacific Coast Highway, sensing the explosive tension in the back seat. Tony Stark did not look outside the window. He peered at the manila folder on his lap, his thumbs tracing the edges of the satellite images in a rhythmic, obsessive pattern. He was not crying. He was not yelling. To the casual observer, he simply appeared numb. But Naruto Uzumaki was not a typical spectator. Naruto used his sovereign senses to check the billionaire's physiological status while sitting in the passenger seat. Tony's heart rate hadn't spiked with fright. It had settled into a sluggish, heavy, metronomic thud. His respiration was shallow and carefully regulated. The frenzied, manic inventor who had spent weeks enthusiastically constructing flight stabilizers had vanished. In his place sat a guy who had recently learned his entire life's work was bathed in the blood of innocence, organized by the man he had viewed as a parent. Naruto identified the physiological shift properly. It was the killer's calm. It was the state a shinobi entered before drawing a blade, when all doubt, fear, and indecision were burned away by the cold, absolute necessity of the job. The automobile sped through the Stark estate gates before coming to a stop in the circular driveway. Tony did not wait for Happy. He pushed open the door and marched toward the glass entrance with big, deliberate strides. He did not speak. He strolled right through the living area, down the wide staircase, and into the subterranean workshop. Naruto followed him, removing his midnight blue suit jacket and uncoiling his golden tail. The lab doors hissed open. "Jarvis," Tony yelled, his voice bouncing harshly off the concrete walls. "Right away, sir," Jarvis responded, recognizing the urgency. The robotic arms in the center of the chamber drew back to display the completed armor. It was breathtaking. The cave's crude, massive iron and the prototype's chilly, unpainted silver were all gone. The Mark III was a perfect, aerodynamic beauty in deep metallic scarlet and beautiful, polished gold. It appeared fierce, regal, and terrifyingly advanced. Tony stepped onto the circular platform in the center of the gantry. "Assemble," Tony ordered. The robotic arms functioned with precision. They moved in synchronized, high-speed ballet, lifting the massive plates and fastening them directly to Tony's specialist undersuit. Clack. Hiss. Whir. The golden thigh plates were securely fastened in place. The crimson torso chassis wrapped over his ribs. and the circular cutout precisely matched the bright blue arc reactor in his chest. The hefty gauntlets sealed around his hands, and the palm repulsor nodes hummed with latent plasma. The biolab's glass doors slid open. Dr. Bruce Banner emerged, wearing a baggy gray t-shirt and pajama pants and massaging his eyes. He froze in his steps, marveling at the mechanical assembly process and the bright red and gold armor. "Tony?" Bruce inquired, his voice heavy with sleep. "Change of plans, Doc." Tony's voice was distorted by the suit's internal communications and echoed from the external speakers. Bruce's eyes expanded, and the remaining sleep vanished. He examined the satellite photographs scattered around Tony's drawing table. He spotted Stark's weaponry. He witnessed the destruction. "Gulmira," Bruce exclaimed, recalling the name from news feeds. He stared up at the armored billionaire. "Let them try," Tony stated coldly. The final component, the golden faceplate, plummeted from the ceiling. A calloused palm grabbed the edge of the faceplate, preventing the robotic arm from locking into place. Tony blinked and looked at Naruto through his open helmet. The teenager stood on the edge of the gantry. He had taken off his fine dress shirt and stood bare-chested in the chilly air of the lab. His blue eyes were piercing and riveted on Tony's. "You are going to clean your house," Naruto stated. It was not a question. Tony affirmed, "My weapons. My responsibility," with remorse and wrath in his eyes. "You are going to fight a small army," Naruto observed calmly. Tony shakes his head. Naruto refused to let grip of the faceplate. His hold tightened, and the metal groaned slightly beneath his Saiyan bulk. Naruto softly stated, "You misunderstand the will of fire," evoking Konoha's ancient ideology. Naruto removed the faceplate and took a step back. He crossed his arms over his chest, his golden aura bursting into life and igniting the dark corners of the lab with a searing, radiating heat. "I am your shield," Naruto stated. Tony focused on the glowing youngster. He remembered how an anti-tank missile was deflected by a bare arm. He remembered how 12 elite Black Ops men were decimated in seconds. Tony let out a wolfish sneer from beneath his helmet. "Jarvis," Tony exclaimed. "Done, sir," Jarvis said. Bruce's scientific mind quickly calculated the logistics of the impossible mission. He did not try to stop them. He recognized the unwavering determination in each of them. "If you're going to do this," Bruce said, walking over to the main holographic console and pulling up a global map, "you need an overwatch. Jarvis is an AI. He can't improvise if you get jammed. I'll monitor the shield and military radar feeds from here. I can route you through the blind spots." Tony felt overwhelmed with thanks as he stared at the intelligent scientist. The House of Broken Toys was officially creating one front. "You're the guy in the chair, Doc," Tony responded. The golden faceplate smashed down, causing a loud click. The icy blue eyes of the Mark III came to life. "Open the roof," Iron Man ordered. The ceiling of the workshop ground opens, displaying a starry California night sky. Tony aimed his palms downwards. The repulsors screamed to life, engulfing the lab in white-hot plasma. He rocketed upward, sending a crimson and gold streak through the aperture and into the night. Naruto didn't hesitate. He poured a great surge of primal force into his feet, causing the concrete under him to break, and shot himself into the sky, followed by a roaring, blinding meteor of pure gold. The flight across the world was a masterclass in brute force physics. Tony pushed the Mark III to its limits, achieving a cruising speed slightly below Mach 2. The suit worked flawlessly, with the gold titanium alloy shedding the intense atmospheric cold without creating a single millimeter of ice on the servos. Naruto Uzumaki flew next to him and effortlessly maintained formation. Tony's HUD sensors saw Naruto as a large, localized thermal anomaly. The youngster was not flying with aerodynamics. Instead, he was physically standing on successive, minuscule explosions of his own golden energy, skipping across the high atmosphere. As they crossed the Atlantic and headed towards the Middle East, the sun began to rise, transforming the horizon into vivid shades of purple and orange. Naruto turned his face towards the sunrise. When the unfiltered ultraviolet rays contacted his flesh, his Saiyan biology reacted. The small exhaustion from the tremendous energy expenditure dissipated immediately. He drank the sunlight, and his cells converted the radiation into pure, limitless stamina. His golden aura shone brighter than the rising sun. "You good, kid?" Tony's synthesized voice echoed straight into Naruto's ear via a tight beam acoustic projection. "I am overflowing," Naruto answered, his voice full of confidence despite the wind. Approaching Afghan airspace, "Gentlemen," Bruce's voice crackled through the secure link from Malibu. "Copy that, Doc," Tony murmured, his voice hardening into steel. The settlement of Gulmira was burning. The 10 rings attacked the tranquil hamlet with overwhelming power. Plumes of dense, black smoke billowed into the parched sky, rising from the smoldering remains of mud brick homes. The noises of combat rang through the tiny streets, including the piercing snap of assault rifles, the heavy thump of diesel engines, and the horrified screams of citizens. Raza's troops were deliberately destroying the village. They kicked in doors and dragged men, women, and children out into the harsh sunlight of the town square. They were separating fighting-age males from their families in preparation for execution or forcible conscription into the terrorist army. A transport truck arrived in the square, carrying large green wooden containers with the iconic Stark Industries emblem. A father, his clothes ripped and dusty, anxiously clutched to his young son. A 10-ringed soldier stepped forward, brutally slamming his Stark-made assault rifle into the father's face. The dad dropped on the ground, blood gushing from his nose, as the soldier tore the sobbing boy from his arms. "Move!" The soldier screamed in a rough dialect, kicking the fallen father in the ribs and shoving him towards the line of men kneeling against a brick wall. The squad commander, a heavily armed man with a scarred face, raised his handgun. He directed it down the line of kneeling dads and sons, ready to give the firing order. The residents pressed their eyes shut, waiting for the end. It wasn't the result of gunfire, it originated from the sky. The atmosphere was filled with a loud, high-pitched whine and the sound of shredding canvas. The commander was about to squeeze the trigger when a meteor-like bolt of crimson and gold impacted the town plaza. The crash devastated the earth. An enormous whirlwind of displaced soil and concussive power erupted outward, knocking a dozen fully equipped 10 Rings troops off their feet like rag dolls. The crater was entirely obscured by the dust plume that rose into the air. The surviving soldiers panicked and raised their rifles, aiming wildly at the whirling brown cloud. A heavy buzz resonated from deep below the dust. A blazing, icy blue repulsor beam cut through the fog, followed by the menacing, highly armored figure of the Mark III. Iron Man steadily rose to his full height. The sunshine reflected off the perfect crimson and gold armor. He didn't look like a guy in a suit. Rather, he resembled a god of war created in the center of a dying star. The terrorists paused, unable to process the machine in front of them. Then, a second sound blasted the heavens apart. This was not a mechanical whine. It was a roar, a deep, resonant, and unimaginably powerful blast of air. A second meteor slammed into the earth, landing 10 feet to Iron Man's right. The impact was dramatically different. It didn't just move the dirt, it superheated it. The sand surrounding the crater immediately melted into a ring of burning, jagged glass. A dazzling golden light destroyed the dust instantly. Naruto Uzumaki rose from his crater. Despite the terminal velocity drop, he remained bare-chested and muscular. His golden hair became wild in the heat of his primal aura. His blue eyes were filled with the cool, trained rage of a shinobi seeing the slaughter of the innocent. The strong golden aura created distorted shadows on the terrorists' scared features. Iron Man turned slowly, his blue eyes focusing on the commander who was going to murder the people. Naruto shifted his weight and dropped into a perfect martial arts posture that would kill anyone. His prehensile tail uncoiled and swayed behind him like an enraged snake. "He's all yours, kid," Tony's fake, metallic voice echoed through the quiet square. Naruto's eyes got smaller. The golden light burst up and blinded the soldiers at the front. "Now it's my turn," Naruto said quietly. The golden ghost disappeared into the lines of the 10 Rings. To people watching, the start of the massacre in the Gulmira town square didn't look like a combat. It looked like a sudden, violent glitch in the world itself. The ghost with the gold color disappeared. He didn't run or jump. Naruto Uzumaki used the body flicker, which is also known as the Shinobi Shunshin no Jutsu. He flooded his Zenkai-adapted muscular and nervous systems with a very strong burst of primal energy. This made him stop being where he was and materialize instantly in the middle of the 10 Rings shooting squad. The air that he suddenly moved through shattered like a whip. A terrorist, with his finger poised on the trigger of a Stark-made assault rifle, unexpectedly found himself shooting into empty space. A thick, rough hand grabbed the steel barrel before the weapon's recoil even hit his shoulder. Naruto didn't pull the weapon away, he only tightened his hold. The massive steel barrel was crushed flat with a horrible, metallic shriek. The Saiyan's fingers were so strong that they fused the barrel together. The soldier was in shock and couldn't move as he looked at his broken rifle. Naruto didn't give the man a chance to think about how impossible it was. He moved his weight and hit the soldier's jaw with the heel of his palm in a precise, deadly blow. He just used around 2% of his physical strength. Just enough to shake the brain inside the skull hard enough to hurt it without breaking the neck. The man's eyes rolled back, and he fell to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Then, the real turmoil began. Fire! Kill the demon! Kill the machine! The commander with scars yelled as he stumbled backward and waved his gun around. A lot of assault firearms came to life. A heavy storm of 5.56mm lead fell on the town square, ripping pieces of clay and masonry off of the structures around it. Iron Man did not get out of the way. In the middle of the dust, Tony Stark stood erect, with the sun shining off his red and gold armor. The bullets made a sound like heavy rain on a tin roof as they hit the gold titanium alloy. The heads-up display, HUD, inside the garment was full of quick, clinical information. Tony's voice was cold, mechanical, and completely without mercy when he said, "Jarvis. Targeting systems, multi-lock." "Engaging multi-lock, sir," Jarvis said in a calm voice. Little red targeting reticles danced over Tony's eyes, locking onto the shoulders, knees, and weapons of the terrorists who were all around the plaza. Small, sleek mechanical pods opened over Tony's shoulders, showing rows of tiny weapons. "Fire," Tony said. Dozens of tiny missiles that could direct themselves hissed out of the pods, leaving behind white smoke trails that twisted like corkscrews. They hit their goals with scary, exact math. The weapons didn't have explosive payloads meant to destroy everything, they had localized concussive charges. A chorus of piercing cracks rang out in the square at the same time. 10 Rings troops were violently pushed to the ground, their weapons broken and their armor damaged. But the biological nightmare that was tearing through the enemy flanks completely overshadowed Tony's mechanical efficiency. Naruto was a golden light that kept moving and blurring. He moved with a violent, flowing grace that made the heavily armed mercenaries look like statues. He didn't use ninjutsu. He didn't shoot plasma bolts. He depended only on his taijutsu skills, which were boosted by the Earth's golden sun's raw, endless force. 3 soldiers tried to get around him by lifting their firearms at the same time. Naruto dipped low and swung his right leg in a deadly arc. The movement of the air alone generated a shockwave that knocked all 3 men's legs out from beneath them before his foot ever touched the ground. Naruto whirled as he dropped, and his prehensile tail snapped out like a bullwhip, hitting their chests with enough force to break ribs and empty their lungs. "He's too fast," a mercenary said in Arabic as he backed away and fired wildly from the hip. Naruto walked into the bullet spread. He let 2 bullets hit his bare, strong chest. They fell to the ground like loose pennies, flattening on his Saiyan skin. The mercenary's eyes got big with pure, primordial fear. Naruto leaned out and tapped the man on the forehead with 2 fingers, sending a tiny jolt of chakra straight into his nervous system. The man fell right away, passing out before he hit the ground. "Sir," Jarvis's voice came over Tony's helmet. "Mr. Naruto's speed is causing a lot of atmospheric drag. He is making a localized heat signature that is more than 800 degrees Celsius. He is literally burning the oxygen out of the air around him." "Keep an eye on the heavy artillery, Tony said, raising his right gauntlet and releasing a bright blue repulsor blast that destroyed a large machine gun on a nearby rooftop. "Let the kid take care of the foot soldiers." The people of Gulmira, who were crowded against the mud brick walls, gazed in shock and astonishment. They were seeing the god's anger. A man of iron who could not be broken and who could control the thunder, and a lad of gold who could control the wind. The scarred leader panicked as he saw that his troops were being taken apart one by one in seconds. He didn't try to fight the golden blur. He focused on the weakest targets he could find. He ran forward and grabbed the young father, who had just been hurled to the ground. The commander pulled the hurt citizen up and pressed the barrel of his gun hard against the father's head. Stop! The commander yelled, his voice breaking with fear as he used the civilian as a human shield. Stop or he'll die. I'll paint the dirt with his brains. Iron Man stopped moving. Tony's repulsors moaned, but they stayed fully charged. He dropped his gauntlets a little. The HUD was furiously figuring out the path. Jarvis, give me a clean shot, Tony said between gritted teeth. No, sir, the AI said. The target is using the civilian as perfect cover. A repulsor blast has a 40% chance of causing thermal damage to the hostage. The commander observed that they were unsure. A nasty, desperate smile burst out on his ravaged face. Take off the armor, Stark, or you'll have blood on your hands. Tony's jaw was locked. He had not traveled halfway around the world to see another innocent guy die. He didn't have to shoot. Naruto Uzumaki had not stopped moving. The moment the commander moved, his sovereign senses had already mapped out the hostage situation. The commander sensed a sudden, scary change in the air pressure right behind him. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The temperature outside shot up, and it smelled strongly of ozone and burnt sand. A low, evil voice hissed right into the commander's ear, "You depend on the blood of others." The commander's eyes got bigger. He tried to pull the trigger. He couldn't do it. Naruto's hand, which had a strong, controlled golden aura about it, was holding the cylinder of the revolver. The steel sword was already burning cherry red and melting because the Saiyan's grip was so hot in one place. The chamber and firing pin were stuck together. The commander gasped and dropped the hot metal lump. His hand was badly burned. Naruto held on to the back of the commander's tactical vest. With one easy pull, he ripped the man away from the civilian and lifted the commander off the ground with just one hand. The civilian father fell to his knees, struggling for air, and quickly pulled his screaming son into a tight hug. Naruto held the commander up in the air with his blue gaze frigid and without pity. He looked at the man's heartbeat, which was fast and scared. This was the guy who had given Obadiah stain his soul. This was the man who set fire to calm homes. Naruto did not kill him. He was a shinobi, yet he was also a visitor to this world. He turned around and saw the billionaire in armor standing in the dust. Stark, Naruto yelled. His voice echoed in the quiet, ruined square. Naruto threw the commander forward, sending him flying through the air. The terrorist fell to the ground and rolled until he stopped right in front of the Mark III's massive, red boots. Iron Man glanced down at the shattered, weeping man who had tormented him in the cave months before. Tony didn't lift his repulsors. He didn't shoot a missile. He walked past the commander and looked at the scared, angry faces of the Gulmira villagers who were slowly coming out of their homes. They possessed shovels, heavy pipes, and the same Stark guns that the terrorists had dropped. Tony looked back down at the leader. Tony's synthesized voice echoed, cold and definitive, "He's all yours." Tony turned aside, and the heavy mechanical joints of his armor hissed as he walked away, leaving the terrorist to the harsh, unyielding justice of the people he had hurt. Tony. Bruce Banner's voice suddenly crackled with urgency over the secure comms link. Satellite sweep shows a huge thermal bloom 2 streets over. You missed a heavy armor unit. It's on its way to catch up with you. Out of nowhere, the side of a nearby structure made of mud bricks blew up. A huge, extensively adapted anti-aircraft tank rolled out of the wreckage, smashing a rusty automobile under its treads. The long, heavy barrel of the main gun turned and locked right into the red and gold armor. Bruce exclaimed, "Incoming!" Boom. The tank shot a shell that was both high explosive and armor-piercing. Tony didn't have time to get out of the way. The shell hit him directly in the chest, right above the arc reactor. The impact's sheer kinetic power sent Tony flying backward like a cannonball. He sailed into the air and crashed through the stone wall of a 2-story building, disappearing amid the debris. Naruto's eyes got big. He quickly moved forward, his aura flashing, ready to rip the tank apart with his bare hands. Tony's voice came over the radio, slightly out of breath and quite angry. "I'm fine, back off, kid, that one is mine." The rubble moved. The Mark III armor came out of the ruins and shook off the dust. There was a huge, blazing burn mark on his chest plate, but the gold titanium alloy had held up perfectly. The suit's integrity was not affected. Tony straightened up straight and gently pointed his right gauntlet at the big tank. He didn't shoot a repulsor blast. A little, smooth chamber on his right forearm opened up. A solitary, tiny rocket came out, little bigger than a pen. Tony shot. The little rocket hummed through the air, entirely ignoring the tank's hefty, sloped front armor. It soared perfectly, right into the open barrel of the tank's main weapon, and then it disappeared into the darkness of the gun. Tony let his arm down, turned his back on the tank, and walked slowly toward Naruto. 3 seconds went by. A muted, terrible second explosion tore through the tank's interior. The heavy steel turret was blasted from the chassis with a loud bang, flying through the air and falling onto the ground, sending up a shower of sparks and black smoke. The people inside were immediately disarmed. Naruto watched the wreckage burn, and a small, impressed smile touched his lips. You have a flair for the dramatic, Stark. It's called presentation, kid, Tony said, but his voice was thin and strained because of the war zone around them. Tony's HUD scanned the scene and locked onto the big pile of green wooden crates in the middle of the settlement. The Stark Industries emblem was an ugly, conspicuous reminder of the bad things he had done in the past. Okay, Tony said, his voice heavy. Let's finish this. I need to blow up the stockpile. Jarvis, get the last of the micro-munitions ready. Wait, Naruto replied, standing in front of the huge pile of weapons. Tony stopped and dropped his gauntlets. What are you doing? We can't leave this here. The 10 rings will come back for it. Naruto looked at the hundreds of powerful rifles, bombs, and artillery shells and said, I'm not saying we should leave it. But your weapons are limited. You might need them if the trip home is hard. Let me clean up the mess. Naruto was standing in front of a huge pile of containers. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He raised his right hand and held it flat, with the palm facing up. He dug deep into the heart of his primal pulse. He didn't simply flare his aura. He also started to pull the golden energy out of his body, moving it via his chakra pathways and compressing it right above his open palm. Tony looked at his HUD and was completely confused by the telemetry Jarvis was sending him. Sir, Jarvis said, seeming worried. The localized energy density in Mr. Naruto's hand is growing exponentially. It is not radiating heat, it is consuming it. He is making a hyper-dense sphere of kinetic plasma. A little, whirling ball of pure, dazzling golden light appeared in Naruto's hand. It appeared like a tiny sun, spinning with uncontrolled, scary intensity, but he held it perfectly, thanks to his strict shinobi discipline. It was a rough, basic, and primal version of the Rasengan that was made to fit his Saiyan body. Naruto opened his eyes, and the blue irises glowed brightly. He held the golden sphere high over his head and then slammed it down hard, right in the middle of the armament stockpile. He didn't yell, he didn't say anything about the attack. As soon as the sphere hit the wooden boxes, it blew apart. There wasn't an eruption of fire. It was a huge, round shockwave of pure, grinding motion. The golden light grew quickly and covered the Stark weaponry mountain. There were no pieces of metal. The primal Rasengan's scary, powerful rotation turned the wooden crates to dust in less than a second. The steel guns, the explosive shells, and the heavy artillery, all of them were under incredible heat and pressure inside the golden sphere. The stash was gone as soon as the light went out. There was a perfectly smooth, round crater of shimmering glass in its stead. The weapons weren't just broken. They were reduced into tiny pieces and melted down into a useless puddle of cooling slag. Tony Stark looked at the bright glass with his mouth slightly open behind his faceplate. Note to self, Tony said quietly to Jarvis, don't let the kid touch things that are fragile. Naruto straightened up straight and brushed off his hands. He was breathing a little harder because the attack had taken a considerable amount of his solar reserves, but his posture was still perfect. He looked across to the peasants. They were looking at him with a mix of deep respect and fear. Naruto bowed slightly and respectfully to the young father he had saved. Naruto simply answered, your village is yours again, and the old shinobi vow of protection was kept. Tony. Naruto. Bruce Banner's voice came through the intercom, and it was very calm. It was tight and full of panic that was about to happen. There's a huge problem on the radar, Bruce said, and in the background, people were typing quickly. Your little light show just set off every early warning system in the Middle East. The US Air Force just sent out an intercept vector. Tony inquired, how long do we have, Doc? His HUD immediately switched to long-range radar. Bruce remarked, They're already in the air. 2 F-22 Raptors are coming from the Al-Udeid airbase. They're armed, hot, and painting you both as unidentified hostile bogies. You need to get out of there right away. Tony looked up at the beautiful blue sky and knew that the fastest fighter jets in the world were flying at them at speeds faster than sound. He looked at Naruto. Are you ready for a dogfight, kid? Naruto crossed his arms, and his golden aura came back to life. A ferocious, shameless grin spread across his face. Lead the way, man of iron. The climb from Gulmira was not a quiet exit, it was a furious, supersonic evacuation. Tony Stark pointed his gauntlets at the destroyed ground, and his repulsors flared to their highest level. The Mark III blasted into the dry Afghan sky, leaving behind a bright red and gold streak. Naruto Uzumaki just willed the primal energy down, and the resulting kinetic explosion sent him flying up with the horrifying, effortless speed of a railgun. The settlement of Gulmira quickly faded behind them into a small mosaic of mud brick cottages and joyful people, who were no longer under the Ten Rings' control. But the victory lap was not meant to last long. Tony, they have you, Dr. Bruce Banner's voice crackled in their ears. The scientist sat in the Malibu command center, halfway across the world, and typed quickly on the holographic keyboards, breaking into the United States military satellite feeds even further. 2 F-22 Raptors are coming in hot from the southwest. They should be intercepted in about 90 seconds. I see them on the HUD, Doc, Tony said in a tight, mechanical voice. He pushed the flying stabilizers on the suit to try to get more speed out of the arc reactor without freezing the servos. Listen to me very carefully, kid. These are American military jets, and they are the good guys. You should never punch, kick, or throw a golden spirit bomb at them. We evade. Do you understand? Naruto's rise was just correct, lingering a few yards to the right of the Mark III. The frigid winds of the high sky thrashed viciously at his naked chest, but his golden aura operated as a perfect thermal screen, dissolving the moisture in the air before it could ever contact his skin. Naruto said, I understand, Stark, and his blue eyes looked out at the horizon. I won't break the metal birds in your village. Good, Tony said under his breath. Jarvis, figure out the F-22's radar cross-section. Can we get away from them? Negative, sir, the AI said with cold logic. The F-22 Raptor can go as fast as Mach 2.25. The Mark III is going as fast as Mach 1.5 right now. They will pass us in exactly 45 seconds. Great, Tony said with a groan. Now it's time to find out how well this paint job works in the wind. Major Allen of the USAF couldn't believe what he saw on his radar screen. It was 50 miles away and moving through the thin air at 2,500 feet per second. Control, this is Whiplash 1. The pilot said into his radio. His voice was a blend of professional restraint and genuine confusion. I can see the bogies, but the radar is going crazy. Bogey 1 is giving me a solid metallic return, but Bogey 2 is acting like a thermal logic. It's giving off heat like an active solar flare, but there's no exhaust signature. Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodes looked over the radar operator's shoulder in the command bunker at Edwards Air Force Base. His brow was pinched in a deep, worried knot. He looked at the two dots on the screen. One was moving around like a UFO, with strange, physics-defying speed. The other was so hot that it was almost blinding their infrared sensors. Rhodey said into the microphone, Whiplash 1, what do you see? Sir. The pilot stopped and squinted through the canopy as he got closer. Bogey 1 looks like a man in a metal suit. And Bogey 2. Sir, it's a guy. He's glowing yellow and doesn't have a flight pack. Rhodey's blood turned chilly. An outfit made of metal. A yellow person with a glow. He thought about the impossible blueprints in Tony's cellar and the scary, quiet youngster who was standing on the tarmac with a tail around his waist. Rhodey muttered, Tony, in a voice that was full of fear. He hit the console with his hand. Whiplash 1, don't engage. I say again, don't. The pilot cut in. Bogey 1 is taking evasive action. His training overrode the fact that what he was witnessing was impossible. Tony saw the two gray shapes of the F-22s break through the clouds behind them high in the sky. They're after us, Tony yelled. Spread out. Tony quickly banked to the left, reducing his altitude in a stomach-churning descent to try to lose the jets in the thick cloud layer below. Naruto did not jump in, he just stopped moving forward. The pilots of the F-22s said it was physically impossible. An object moving at Mach 1.5 couldn't just halt in midair without being torn apart by its own inertia. But Naruto sent all of his primal pulse into his biomagnetic anchor, which created a huge, confined gravity well. In less than a second, he went from going faster than sound to not moving at all. Whiplash 2, the wingman, screamed by Naruto, missing the floating kid by fewer than 50 feet. The jet's wake hit Naruto like a wall of force, but he didn't move an inch. He watched the huge, gray war machine roar by him, and his shinobi eyes followed the amazing engineering with mild interest. Bogey 2 just stopped. The wingman yelled into his radio as he pulled his plane into a steep vertical rise to prevent a crash. He defied inertia. "What the hell am I looking at?" "Focus on Bogey 1. Whiplash 1 yelled, and then he peeled off and dove into the skies after the red and gold streak. Tony was threading the needle, using the Mark III's amazing ability to move quickly to outturn the fighter plane. But the F-22 was made for this kind of place. The jet followed Tony like a shadow, and the pilot's targeting computer was having a hard time locking on to the flying guy. Bruce said in a tense voice, "Tony, you have a radar lock. He's getting ready to fire an AIM-9 Sidewinder. You have to shake him." "Working on it, Doc," Tony moaned as the G-forces pushed hard on his chest during a vicious barrel roll. Major Allen said, "I have a lock," and his thumb was heavy on the firing stud. "Deploying weapons." Whoosh. The Sidewinder missile fell out of the jet's internal storage, and its solid rocket motor lit up, leaving a trail of white smoke. It followed the Mark III's huge heat signature from its boot thrusters and sped up to Mach 2.5 right away. "Incoming," Jarvis yelled in Tony's ear. Tony used his countermeasures, which sent a flurry of bright, blazing flares blasting out of the suit's hip compartments. He banked hard, thinking the missile would follow the magnesium fakes. The Sidewinder didn't pay attention to them. Its powerful targeting software had zeroed down on the arc reactor's exact thermal frequency. It banked rapidly, changed its course, and got closer to the Mark III in just a few seconds. Tony prepared for impact, knowing that the armor could take small weapons fire but that a direct hit from an air-to-air missile would tear the suit apart and send him to his death. Shunshin. A bright, loud flash of gold appeared just between the missile and the Mark III. Naruto Uzumaki appeared out of thin air. He had been watching the dogfight from above, keeping an eye on the missile's exact path. He didn't have thrusters or repulsors. He only possessed pure Saiyan speed. Naruto did not try to stop the missile, he got it. The Sidewinder hit Naruto's open hands at a speed of more than 2,000 miles per hour. The impact's tremendous kinetic power propelled Naruto back through the air, and his boots left a trail of superheated plasma in the sky as he tried to slow down the missile's speed. "Kid!" Tony shouted as he watched the teen wrestle with a live, supersonic weapon. Naruto clenched his teeth and his Saiyan muscles bulged as he held on to the missile's sleek, metal body. The warhead's explosive payload was ready to go off when it hit something. He couldn't just toss it away since the proximity fuse would go off and the shrapnel would rip Tony's armor to shreds. He had to make it safe. Using what he learned as a shinobi, Naruto concentrated a tiny, microscopic thread of dense primal energy right into his fingertips. He pushed his fingers into the steel casing of the rocket, just where his sovereign senses could feel the guidance computer's electrical hum. Naruto squeezed the missile's internal processor so hard that it broke. The missile's thruster on the back sputtered and stopped working. The explosive payload went out. It was just a hefty, useless piece of metal all of a sudden. Naruto threw the deactivated missile over his shoulder without thinking about it. He watched as it fell harmlessly into the empty mountains miles below. "Missile neutralized," Naruto said over the radio. He was floating in the air and his chest was heaving a little from the effort. "Wow. Okay, remind me to give you a raise," Tony said, catching his breath and balancing the Mark III. But the dogfight wasn't done yet. Whiplash 1 saw a luminous youngster literally catch his missile out of thin air, so he jerked his aircraft into a frenzied, evasive climb. He drove the F-22's engines too hard in his panic, going past the critical angle of attack. The jet shook a lot. The airflow across the wings split. "Engine stall! Engine stall!" The automated warning system screamed in the cockpit. Major Allen wrestled the stick, trying to get back control of the plane's aerodynamics, but the huge fighter jet went into a flat spin. It fell from the sky like a rock, heading straight toward the sharp, merciless peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Whiplash 1 is going down. Rhodey's voice boomed in the command bunker, and everyone in the room was terrified. Tony saw the jet fall. He cried, "Jarvis, full power to thrusters," as he dove after the jet that was tumbling. But the Mark III wasn't made to save a plane that weighed 40,000 pounds by dropping it. Tony couldn't get it. "Bail out! Bail out!" the pilot cried as he grabbed the ejection lever between his legs. The F-22's canopy ripped off in a huge blast of explosive bolts. A second later, the pilot's seat shot out of the spinning jet and flew high into the thin air. Tony sighed with relief as he saw the pilot get away from the fatal plane. But the relief turned to ice right away. The pilot unbuckled as the ejection seat reached its highest point and waited for his main parachute to open on its own. Nothing took place. A piece of shrapnel from the explosive canopy sequence had cut the deployment cord. The pilot was falling freely, helplessly falling into the sharp rocks 10,000 feet below. "His chute is stuck," Tony cried as he pushed his suit to its limit, but it was too far away. The angle of fall was excessively steep. "I have him," Naruto said in a voice that was completely calm and scary. Naruto didn't fly toward the pilot. He pushed his primal pulse all the way in, letting go of his biomagnetic anchor and making himself a dead weight. He plunged from the sky like a bullet, and the speed at which he fell matched the speed at which the pilot fell. The wind howled and ripped at his face, but Naruto's blue eyes were fixed on the man below him who was screaming and falling through the air. Naruto sent a little burst of plasma to his feet to change his path. He got closer in a matter of seconds. He didn't take the pilot out of the air because the rapid stop at terminal velocity would break the weak human's spine. Naruto, on the other hand, stood exactly under the man who was falling. Naruto activated his golden aura as the pilot crashed into him, making a soft, concentrated cushion of pure kinetic energy. He put his powerful arms around the pilot's body and held him securely against his chest. "Brace," Naruto said. He didn't try to stop them right away. He shot out regulated, continuous spurts of plasma from his feet, making him a living, biological retro-rocket. He gently bled their speed, expertly fighting gravity, until their horrifying freefall turned into a steady, controlled drift. They landed softly on the snowy top of a craggy mountain slope. Naruto got the pilot, who was shivering and breathing too fast, back on his feet. Major Allen fell to his knees in the snow, tearing off his oxygen mask and gasping for the thin, cold air. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, and saw the bare-chested teen standing in the snow with a warm, wonderful golden light around him. A few seconds later, a loud, heavy impact shook the snowcap. Iron Man landed a few feet distant. The Mark III walked slowly toward them, and the scorching red armor made the snow hiss and melt. Tony stood over the pilot, who was kneeling, and looked down through the faceplate's bright blue eyes. "You're welcome," Tony's robotic voice said in a low tone. Out of nowhere, the encrypted military comms channel made a loud noise in Tony's ear. Rhodey's voice came over the radio, strained and angry. "Whoever is driving that suit, I'll send the whole United States Air Force after you if you don't tell me who you are in 10 seconds. Tony exhaled as the adrenaline gradually wore off. He tapped the side of his helmet, which opened a direct line to the command bunker. "Keep your shirt on, Sour Patch," Tony remarked in his natural, sardonic manner over the military comms. "Your son is safe. Tell him to stop shooting at my intern." The room in the command bunker in California became completely quiet. The people who ran the radar looked at their screens. Rhodey grasped the edge of the console, his knuckles white, and a huge, unbelieving chuckle was about to burst out of his throat. Rhodey muttered, "Tony?" And the wrath went away right away, leaving him feeling completely relieved. "The one and only," Tony said, staring at Naruto, who was looking at the snowy mountain peak with modest interest. "I'm going to need you to get rid of the radar logs from the last 20 minutes. It's a favor for saving your pilot." "You blew up a terrorist camp and brought the kid?" Rhodey grabbed his temples, feeling a big headache coming on. "Tony, the Pentagon is going to have a heart attack." "Let them," Tony murmured coldly, turning his back on Gulmira. "I just finished reorganizing Stark Industries. I'll call you when I get home. Iron Man out." Tony stopped the feed. He looked at Naruto. "Are you ready to go home, kid?" Naruto nodded. and the golden aura came back to life, melting the snow around his feet. Stark, my stomach needs 1,000 calories of your processed meat. The sound of Tony's laugh echoed off the empty mountains. Cheeseburgers are on me. Let's go. The drive back was much quieter. The sun had fully risen, and as they finally got close to the Malibu cliffs, it shed a warm, bright light over the Pacific Ocean. Tony was worn out. His body hurt from the G-forces, the hits, and the mental stress of driving the armor in a war zone. Naruto looked completely revived after being in the sun for hours, even if his Saiyan metabolism was making him feel hungry. They fell into the underground hangar, and the ceiling panels slid shut behind them, locking them back inside the clean, secret facility. When Tony went onto the disassembly gantry, he tripped a little. The robotic arms came to life and carefully took off the red and gold plates. "Welcome home, sir. Mr. Naruto," Jarvis said to them. "Dr. Banner is currently sleeping in the secondary lab. He stayed awake to keep an eye on your telemetry until you crossed international waters." Tony said, "Good man," as he stepped out of the last piece of armor. He was wearing a black undersuit that was soaked with sweat. He went to a table nearby and got a towel to wipe his face. Naruto went straight to the huge, commercial-grade fridge that Tony had put in the lab's corner. He opened it and quickly tore into 3 pre-packaged sandwiches and a gallon of milk. Suddenly, the lab's thick glass doors hissed open. "Tony, you need to see this. The board is going crazy." Pepper Potts walked into the room with a tablet in her hand and her eyes on the screen. She raised her head. She came to a complete stop. Tony was standing there in his damp undersuit, looking tired and hurt. But that wasn't why Pepper dropped her iPad, which made a loud noise when it hit the concrete floor. She looked at the huge, robotic gantry that was in the middle of the room. There was a scary, heavily armored, red and gold robotic outfit hanging from the mechanical arms. There were burn marks, dust, and a dozen deep, unmistakable bullet holes on the chest and shoulders. After that, she turned to the corner. Naruto Uzumaki stopped with a sandwich halfway to his mouth. He was shirtless and dirty. He gazed at Pepper, and his blue eyes blinked slowly in amazement. The lab was completely quiet, save for the sound of the arc reactor in Tony's chest. Tony slowly took the towel from his face. He gazed at the armor that was full of bullet holes, then at Naruto, and finally at Pepper's shocked, wide-eyed face. "So," Tony said, clearing his throat and giving a faint, apologetic smile. "How did the rest of the gala go? Stay tuned for more." Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I'm thrilled you watched the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for even more exciting content coming your way soon.